All right. Welcome, everybody, to the Alfalfa podcast. Thank you for joining us today. As always, Wednesday at 5 p.m., we are live today. If you're listening in, come join us next Wednesday, 5 p.m. PST. Check us out on the YouTube. If you're watching now, what's up to everyone in the chat? I see Hookem. I see Goldman Tracks. I see Matt. Who else we got in there? Ali, what's up? Thank you guys for joining us live. Always happy to have you in there. Do us a favor. Like the video, always helps out. And if you're not subscribed already, subscribe to the YouTube channel. Get the alerts on when we go live. All the links are at alfalfapod.com. So before we get into everything else, we have a friend joining us today, a special guest. David Seroy is joining us. He's a San Diego native since what, last year, right?
Just since May.
Since May. Okay. So David is a Bitcoin layer 2 evangelist. There's not many of those out there, which is why it's special to have him here.
Small but growing.
Yes.
Growing revolution.
It's a new thing.
It's a group that only has the luxury of being hated by both Bitcoin maxis and ETH maxis. So
100%.
we like to swim in the middle gray of topics, you know, kind of that radically moderate, try to, you know, not necessarily be dogmatic about anything. So I think you're going to fit right in today.
Should be good. We've been accused of being a little on the Bitcoin hating side on the show, even though we're not. But you know, it's a bit of a slanted show for sure. So it should be interesting to have like a check on me for once.
Yeah, and check out David_Seroy on Twitter. He has more followers than Steven, so cred check right there. Checks out. Yeah, I mean, street cred is high.
Who doesn't?
These two boys met playing pickleball, so I'm sure we'll chat about that as well. Steven, what'd you bring us to drink today? Like, seems like your go-to.
I'm a big Negro Modelo guy these days. You know, I love the Mexican beer.
We know. Big
Mexican beer fan, especially like 5 p.m. on a weekday when the sun's still out. Yeah, I don't want like a glass of red wine. Yeah, I drink it sometimes in the pod, but the Mexican beer after a long hard day of drilling pickleball.
Of what? I was going to say, what do you spend a long
scrolling Twitter and shit posting? You know. Yeah.
David, do you drink normally? You mentioned you might have been lightweight, so do you have a?
I'm going through like a not a sobriety phase, but I'm just not drinking as much as I used to. You know.
Okay.
I feel like I was like a little bit ahead of that trend. I feel like it's like really cool right now to be like, oh, I'm sober. Like I don't really care about that. I've just never really been a big drinker. You know?
Okay. Where does Mexican beer sit on your priority list though for when you do have a beverage?
In terms of beers, living down here in Southern California, it's at the top.
Yeah, it's okay, let's get into our sponsors and then we'll talk about some investment theses. We always want to revisit our theses all the time. Steven does a good job of bringing it up for us, but since we have David here, I think it's a good time to bring it up again. But first off, let's give a shout out to ZBiotics. Go to zbiotics.com/alfalfa. Thank you guys for always sponsoring the pod. As a reminder, ZBiotics is a pre-alcohol probiotics. Sorry, David, we didn't give you one before you started having to drink. But
that would have been really nice of us.
Yeah, that would have been thoughtful of us as a host.
You know, it's so funny. I'll just say, like, I'm sitting here listening to this in my Instagram because I don't do many live recordings. I was like, okay, I need to put this on 2x, like speed past this.
Yes.
You know?
Yeah.
And then I was just like, wait, no. Like,
No,
I'm live.
Yeah, this is happening.
Skip 30 seconds.
You take it before you drink. It was invented by PhD scientists to help you out with those rough mornings after drinking. So when you drink, alcohol gets turned into that nasty toxin, acetaldehyde. Yeah, we've gotten so much better at pronouncing that.
So good at saying that now.
Yeah, so it's that and not dehydration that makes you feel like shit in the morning. And ZBiotics produces an enzyme that crushes that in your stomach for you. So Q2's upon us. I don't know. I do quarterly goals. I'm sure you guys may as well. And if you have some of those health goals, should help out with kind of staying on track, getting your workouts in, and healthy eating, even though you have a night out or two. So zbiotics.com/alfalfa. Get a discount for your first purchase. And then we also have Magic Spoon. So along the same lines of kind of staying healthy and keeping on track with your health goals, check out magicspoon.com/alfalfa. So you mentioned last time that you like to eat it with protein powder. I don't. We were talking with David earlier. I like to just crush it raw in the office as a snack, and just.
I had the fruity one in a circular shape.
Yes.
Last night. Might remind you of something.
Night?
Yes.
Oh yeah, Magic
Yeah.
Spoon is for all meals.
Yeah, I actually do basically eat it with every meal now because I'm just always like hungry and I want a snack. It was so good. It was like actually insanely good. I almost just went through the whole box in one
Yeah,
sitting, which was
it's a
not
slippery slope.
Yeah, it's very easy to do.
But yeah, they're high protein, less sugar. So they got cocoa, fruity, peanut
no
butter,
sugar, right?
and frosted.
0
grams
Zero
of
sugar. Nick.
13, 14 grams of protein, 4 to 5 grams of net carbs, and it's at only 140 grams per serving, assuming you only have one serving every time you open up that box. And all the friendlies you can think of: keto friendly, gluten friendly, grain free, soy free. So yeah, go to magicspoon.com/alfalfa. Use the code alfalfa to support the pod and get some money off your purchase. And if you or the kids don't like it, they'll give your money back. No questions asked.
Last order of business.
Please do.
Alfalfa NFT.
Yeah.
You guys continue to collect them. You're awesome.
Yeah.
We appreciate that.
Take a lot of pride in it.
We're at pods.media/alfalfa, or you can find them, I believe, on Farcaster.
Yep.
Number one collector last week, lemoncake.eth.
Ooh.
Shout out
He usurped.
to Lemon Cake. Yes.
You guys are issuing those on Bitcoin, right?
Yeah, we'll talk about that.
I mean, I guess you can just have some pointers that go to like an IPFS cert.
It's a little unfeasible with the cost of these and the gas, you know. But they're on Optimism, and on Optimism we have very, 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 very cheap transactions now. So basically zero. It's a great thing. Anyway, great way to support the pod. Collect those NFTs. We drop them. Are they live now? They're like, yeah, they'll be live when people are listening to the recording of this for sure.
Absolutely.
They're only live for like a week though, so you got to get them, or they'll be gone forever. Or you'll be buying them off Rectum or something. You know?
Buying them off Dan Simmons, who I saw in the
Simmons.
chat as well.
Dan Simmons is the he's
the goat collector.
He's got them all.
Shout out to Adam, Tyler, Ben, Tom Nom Nom. I see you guys in the chat. Thanks for hopping in and joining us today. So I wanted to ask you before we get into like these investment theses. You guys saw the Blast hack. So a developer stole, what was the total dollar amount? 97 million?
92 million, you know.
90-ish million.
90-ish, you know, what's a
Stolen
few
from
million amongst
this
friends.
project called Munchables, which I didn't even care to really
Munchables.
look into it. It looks like it's some like game with like it's like a, what were those things you used to call where you used to grow characters and feed them and
Tamagotchi.
Yeah,
Tamagotchi?
Tamagotchi. It looked like something like that.
I thought Munchables was a competitor to Magic Spoon.
Oh man, that would be good.
Yeah.
But how that or this actual project got $92 million in value locked?
Crypto is amazing.
No idea. No idea. But the point is that the dev stole some money, and very quickly crypto Twitter went in there. I think Zach XBT started doing some research, but the question came: Blast the L2 may have the power to roll back the chain.
You do have the power.
Reverse the transactions.
Benefits of just having everything in like a multi-sig.
Right. And so fast forward, this story has actually concluded and the dev gave the money back. But I think it's worth talking about. I want to get your guys' opinions on, should they have rolled back the chain and reversed those transactions? I assume we're kind of decentralization pros if we're sitting here today, but maybe this brings up other thoughts and other vectors we should talk about.
Well, I didn't think it was. I thought they should roll back the chain. Like, I think the idea of like not rolling it back would be like insane.
But why? Like I agree with you, but I'm curious.
I mean, first of all, like everybody opted into the thing and basically just dumped like $1 billion into a multi-sig.
A 3 out of 5.
There was no promise of any sort of decentralization. It's a freaking degen fest. I don't know if you've been on there, but it's just like everything on there is a rug or like some crazy casino. There's a lot of experimentation going on. They're very clearly like moving fast and breaking a lot of things. Like nobody put money on there. Like, what? I can't believe that. Like, what? Pac-Man controls my money? I thought this was Bitcoin. And so like I was a proponent of the ETH rollback, right? And that was far more of an interesting question than this. Like,
You're
this
talking
is
about the DAO attack, like, however many years ago.
Yeah, and like in retrospect, that was obviously the correct decision. Like, I don't know if anybody wants to argue against that, but it seems pretty obvious. So like this would be like if they didn't, it like might be dead. And beyond that, like I think you could argue that like Pac-Man might face like actual like legal
Yes.
problems, like, and just giving North Korea like $100 million is just bad. Like none of this is good.
I agree. If they had the power, they did have the power, then I think they would have had to have rolled it back for legal reasons. I mean, and it would have had a pretty big significance going forward, because if they would have showed that any L2 or any sidechain has the power to roll back transactions, once it's done once, if you're the team that doesn't roll it back, you're basically, I think from a legal threat wise, you're saying, you know, you're pretty exposed. I mean, either from a government angle or just from the whoever was harmed. You have the power to reverse this fraud. And what are you saying if you don't do it? Are you okay with fraud? And I was trying to put myself in each stakeholder, like, okay, if I'm Blast, if I'm, well, not the hackers, but if I got my money stolen, and if I got my money stolen, I would be like, you better fucking roll that chain back ASAP. Yeah. And if you're rich enough, you'd be like, or you're going to have legal problems, you know, pretty quick. So David, curious, you know.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if I have like a crazy hot take, but for me, like none of this is all that surprising. Like I'm you know, I wouldn't have been surprised if they roll back the chain, because like Steven said, it's kind of like, you know, whatever, a degenerate chain. Like I don't think it's like, you know, crowning achievement is decentralization. You know, also like even if they didn't roll back the chain, you know, it's like it's very hard for those hackers to like, you know, actually get that money out. You know, like eventually they're going to run into like some sort of bridge, or they're going to go into like stable coins, and then, you know, the government's going to get involved with like, you know, Tether or Circle. So I think a lot of these hackers are kind of like, well, you know, like, cool, I made like an awesome little achievement. Maybe I'll get like a dope bounty for it. But like, it's insanely difficult for them to actually like get away with it. And then, you know, not to like, you know, bring up all like the DAO attack and Ethereum and stuff, but like there was like a subtle precedent that was set there. So it's kind of like, why are these L2s going to like stand so hard on like decentralization? You know, like when Ethereum already rolled back the chain, it's just like, obviously this is all going to happen. I'm not like, you know, morally grandstanding as to whether it was like the right call or not. But yeah, like it's not surprising at all. So I am curious though, like you mentioned kind of the Ethereum, you know, the DAO attack and rolling back the chain. You said that like, you know, you do think it was the right call, which I'm not taking a position whether it was or not, but like, why do you think that was the right call?
Because Ethereum is worth hundreds of billions of dollars, and Ethereum Classic is basically worthless. Like in retrospect, like the market could have gone either way, right? Like the market could have like latched on to that and been like, yeah, but it turns out through like most of the entirety of crypto, like maximum decentralization is actually not what everybody really, really, really cares about. It's more of like a Bitcoin specific sort of like North Star, but like for Ethereum, it's a lot more. Ethereum's closer to Bitcoin. Everything else is just like it's not really like a principle of why all the users are here, right? And like if you look at Ethereum L2s, that's like obvious. Like one of the glaring issues with Ethereum these days is that like Ethereum's like, yeah, everybody use the L2. That's the whole purpose of the scaling roadmap, because gas is $1 million on L1, but all the L2s are basically centralized, right?
Yeah.
So
but I think some of them might have been different. Like, you know, one of the reasons why Ethereum really had like kind of like almost no choice to kind of like roll back the chain is because they knew they were going to transition to like proof of stake. If you have like this one hacker controlling like an inordinate amount of like all of the stake, then you are essentially forfeiting like decentralization. So, you know, I think that is like a fundamental difference between like potentially rolling back the chain if there was like something that happened on Bitcoin and proof of work versus like proof of stake. It's like you have to fork out that balance, because like it'd be the equivalent of like them owning a ton of hash power on Bitcoin. You also mentioned, and sorry if I'm like, you know, kind of like throwing out questions here.
Let it rip.
Well, you said it's kind of like for Bitcoin, we have this kind of like North Star of decentralization, and you kind of like implied that's not as that important for like the broader crypto ecosystem. Then it's like, well, then what is the point? And maybe it's just like you want these permissionless systems that can all, you know, interact with each other and be on like one shared global state. And that is like a noble goal. But then that's basically like what, you know, Solana has. Like Ethereum has this kind of fragmentation, and maybe they solve the liquidity and the fragmentation. But like my point is, if you don't own like the money category of Bitcoin, and like you're kind of willing to like give up on the decentralization point, and you don't have the shared liquidity and cross composability, it's like, I don't know, man.
Are you saying my bags are fucked?
No, I mean, I hold Ethereum. I love Ethereum. I think like the technology and the innovation that they pioneered is like truly groundbreaking. And I think we'll get into it. That's kind of what I want to bring to Bitcoin. But I think my question still stands, where it's kind of like
decentralization in and of itself is obviously a trade-off. It's not like an amazing thing that by giving up, like you're getting a lot of stuff in return when you forfeit some decentralization and some amount of like credible neutrality. And I do think these things are like a spectrum. It's not like 0 to 1, right? Like the main thing is that like the more sort of centralized a system is, like I think like the better it can like innovate and run experiments, for example. Like there hasn't been a lot of innovation on Bitcoin. I think you'll be the first to acknowledge that.
Totally.
Versus like Ethereum, versus like say like a company, right? Like think about even within Ethereum, we had this like love affair with DAOs, right? And it turned out they sucked for a lot of reasons. Like one of them being that like you couldn't get anybody together to do anything. Like at least in a publicly traded company, right? There's a CEO and he or she can just make decisions.
Yeah.
And that's good. That's like good for the purposes of that. Like it would really suck if like anytime the CEO of McDonald's had to do something, he had to go to a bunch of anons on the internet.
Vote even.
Yeah. Yeah. Like get some vote. And it would just be obviously like a stupid model. So yeah, to me it's not like a simple good or bad thing.
So one last question before we move off this blast topic a little bit. So I imagine that 50% of people on crypto Twitter, when they saw the question, should we roll it back? They're like, wait, pardon? Wait, what? You can reverse my transactions?
Really? I feel like everybody knew that they could do that.
Maybe. No, I think there was a lot of shock. And then I want to know if you're BlackRock, I don't know how technical they are, and you're imagining this like future of tokenized assets, and you're promised this, permissionless global settlement layer, and you're like, wait, hold on 1 second, I just dropped 100 million on chain, and you're saying you can reverse transactions. Do you think that gives them any pause? Or
no,
they have fork language in the ETF documents.
What's that?
They have language about like what would happen like with fork, and that like I'd have to look up the specifics, but the point is it's like they have thought about this, and like they do have kind of the potential to kind of choose like which fork and kind of the direction it goes.
You're right, I did see that in there.
Well,
Yeah.
we got our first donation.
Okay.
Rectum donated $69. If I donate enough, will the man with the mustache touch me?
All right.
Pass. Well, I appreciate you taking your wallet out, but you'll have
David,
to keep
take
the
one for
rest
the
in your
team
pants.
here. There has to be a
come on.
price.
It's Mustache March, I've been waiting, 33 years to be able to, grow a mustache.
Well, maybe to arouse Rectum a little more. David, are you better at pickleball than Steven?
No.
Don't look at him.
No.
No?
No.
Wow, you said that so...
I
don't know if that was a real
In my-
answer.
Why don't you? Nick doesn't think I'm good at pickleball.
I know you're extremely good.
I do have my days where I could take Steven out. But I would
Okay.
say if we kind of added up, aggregate all of the games, I do think that he would barely edge me out.
Okay.
I'm a man of integrity, and
I'm just gonna let this barely slide because
All right.
we have stuff
Can
to
we
do.
go on to the next topic, please?
Yeah, well, Rectum, that $69 was then well spent.
Legend.
And, you're a legend. We appreciate you very much.
Legend. No, one more thing to your point. Like the BlackRock thing is more akin to like USDC, right? Like one thing that's nice about ETH is like you have like all this flexibility. Like you can use ETH as this settlement layer, right? But then on top of it, you can build your own L2 if you want, and that L2 can have some trade-offs,
With the BlackRock sequencer.
Yeah, right. And which is good if you're like an entity that wants to have some control of stuff, and users can choose to opt into that or not. And then you also can have tokens like USDC, which settle on Ethereum, and those transactions, are fine. But like USDC itself has this contract where they can freeze funds and do all sorts of other stuff, and I think that's fine, and I think it's necessary like to integrate with like the real world,
Right.
which I think is kind of what I want to do.
Are you ready for all these problems on Bitcoin Layer 2, if and when that happens?
Yeah, I mean they're isolated to the layer 2. I mean that's like the beauty of it. I think I think if and when Ethereum kind of gets to this end game scaling roadmap, you know, like the Verge and the Splurge and all this stuff that like the talks about, like I think they're gonna look back and be like, fuck, like we don't want all this shit on like the layer one. It's like there's so much liquidity, there's so much apps, there's kind of like the stable coin drama, there's you know, all of these issues that like MEV, most of the MEV is actually extracted on like really inefficient, you know, like contracts and apps that exist on the layer one that bleeds down into the validator set. Like MEV is a super pernicious issue. Like if we can kind of like cross this threshold in Bitcoin world and we can build these L2s, and like maybe it's kind of clunky to kind of like get there initially, but then you can open up this entire landscape in that frontier. Like what you ultimately want is basically like a very, very, you know, minimal L1 that you can essentially just post ZK proofs to. Like in an ideal Ethereum world, they would have, you know, extendable blob space, so you can have like the data availability layer with like the dank sharding and stuff like that, and then you can post ZKPs. Like they would want nothing else.
Right.
And, you know, thankfully they pioneered a lot of this stuff, and now we're going to bring it to Bitcoin.
Yeah, I mean, I should point out
you
that
opened up Pandora's box there.
I
See
know,
what you did?
and I wanted to actually point people to the little whiteboard session video you posted on your Twitter. I think it's pinned on your profile, right?
Yeah, I have one on kind of ZK rollups and how they could be done on Bitcoin.
Yeah, so if you guys are interested in diving in a little more technically on how it's possible and what it might look like if and when these things come to fruition, yeah, check out David's Twitter profile, David_Seroy. There's a good little video on it.
Let's put a pin in that for now, because
Okay.
I want to get to that at the end of the next thing.
Let's do it.
Because I want to rip through this.
Okay.
We want to take a pause here and like reevaluate
Yes.
the investment theses
Yeah.
we've
Go ahead,
had.
guide me.
We like to take a step back once in a while and say like, hey, remember that thing I thought?
Yeah.
Is that still a good idea, or is that stupid now? Should
Yeah.
I move my money elsewhere?
I mean, I was telling you yesterday, like I keep having these questions in my head about, you know, you're getting thrown all these new ideas constantly, especially in a bear market, not so much. But as we've kind of lifted off a little bit, there's all these narratives and ideas being thrown at me. And I like frameworks. I like to put things in boxes and structures so that I can make sense of them and hopefully like guide them down a long-term vision. And I've been trying to keep asking myself the question, like, what's the fat pitch right now? And because I don't want to miss the fat pitch amongst all these, you know, kind of smaller opportunities.
That pitch, like the number one thing, like you just walk into the world, you've got capital to allocate, and you have to swing at one thing. What is it?
Yeah, and you don't necessarily have to put it work all the time, but someone hands you $1 million saying, hey, you can only put this in one investment. You want to save it up for the fat pitch if and when it presents itself. And, you know, I think for me, a lot of that, what that entails is asking yourself, what is the market pricing in now? And then once you understand what the market's pricing in, maybe some of these fat pitches start to show themselves. So like one of the things I was looking at today was kind of updating myself on the ETH ETF odds. Looks like it's down to 22%.
Yeah, if that.
By what date?
May, June.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. And I think it'll happen eventually. I don't know if it'll happen this year, next year, whatever. But that seems to like set up somewhat of a fat pitch. At the same time, you have the narrative of like, well, Bitcoin's getting all these flows and Solana might just be better. And a lot of people pretty much buying into, why don't you just barbell your portfolio, Bitcoin, Sol. So it seems like a setup for a potential fat pitch in ETH. So that's
Well,
what
I think the first thing is like, what is your time horizon? You
Like-
can have a fat pitch on like a weekly trade. You can have a fat pitch on like a decade trade.
Mine is usually multiple years, but let's say
Yeah, let's start there.
18 months to 3 to 4 years.
3 to
somewhere
4
in there.
years.
Yeah.
What's the fat pitch for you? 4 years.
I mean, I've been thinking ETH as one, as I described. I still like these. This is non-crypto, but these GLP-1 drugs. I think we're seeing, you know, if you look on the internet, the biggest, you know, top-selling products are anything that does weight loss. And now we have a drug that, you know, obviously there's going to be trade-offs that show up over time, but we have a drug that is being prescribed and people are accepting at a mass scale that's restricted by supply. And then we're all seeing these like side benefits of like, oh, it helps prevent some liver disease and heart disease. And I think those are going to come out. And at some point, you're easily going to have hundreds of millions of people on these drugs. So that's another one that's still staring me right in the face. And then the third one.
This is basically buying Eli Lilly or buying Novo Nordisk.
Yeah. And maybe just staying on top of that sector roughly to see if there's any disruptors. And the third biggest one that seems obvious to me is not AI in general, but I look at Apple and Google, and the market is not pricing in some kind of uplift in whatever impact they had. And, at least Google uses AI now in their ad serving platforms, but I don't think they're kind of pricing in when you have this many consumers and business users at scale and what it'll allow them to do to sell services for a fee. So those are the three that have been coming to mind lately.
I don't feel that good about Google and Apple, to be honest.
Perfect. You need that pessimism to really set up a good fat pitch.
So the main thing is like, so the other day I was like, I need to get a new phone, right? Like my phone doesn't charge plugging in anymore. It just doesn't work. Like I can only charge with the magnetic charger. The battery lasts like 8 hours and then it's dead. I think this is an iPhone X, so I think this is like 5 generations behind now at this point. But like the main reason I'm not doing it, it's just like I just don't care that much anymore. Like every phone is so similar to me, and they're like $1,600 now for like the top tier
if I
ones.
offered
money that could go to meme coins too.
Exactly.
But if I offered you $10,000 cash right now to switch to an Android, would you take it?
Hard pass.
Yeah, I probably
Get
would.
the fuck out of here. No, you wouldn't.
Yeah, I would just $10,000 and just buy some Doge or something.
Then he would buy the Solana phone.
Wow.
Yeah, that
Wow.
seems like a good
So
trade.
you answered your fat pitch right there. You just your natural instinct was
Like,
to put into Doge.
I see Google fumbling the bag. I see Apple kind of fumbling the bag. I know they're great companies. They've always done great stuff, and but also, it's like unthinkable that the big companies can be dethroned. But it happens all the time. So like, I would say that maybe a good trade. Maybe Apple's like a good trade. I don't see it as a trade. Definitely not a fat pitch.
Okay.
What do you?
On my fat pitch.
Yeah. What do you think? I mean, it's okay. You can say Bitcoin.
Well, I got 3, and I obviously am going to lead with Bitcoin. One, I mean, I think it's like the impending sovereign debt crisis. Maybe that happens in 2, 5, 10 years. Like I do think Bitcoin is kind of like owning that narrative. Like I feel like that's like a very like comfortable thing to kind of bet on. And then the halving, and then really the kind of like the asymmetric bet with Bitcoin is everybody's just like, oh, Bitcoin, great. People are talking about store of value, but it's all this kind of renaissance that's happening with like these layer 2s. And I'm kind of like at the frontier of seeing what the stuff is happening. I'm seeing these conversations. I'm like, whoa, like some of this stuff is like real, and you have like legit elite world-class like developers and researchers kind of coming into this stuff behind the scenes. Like you have some of the biggest names and the biggest VCs that are like banging on people's doors trying to get into deals, and there's gonna be a shit ton of freaking scams and shit, and like kind of like fake attempts at being these kind of like Bitcoin L2s, but there's gonna be some real ones. And I think that is like the fat pitch thesis.
Okay.
I like that. I'm gonna pause you there for 1 second because I agree with you totally. Like I actually think Bitcoin still is the fattest, most obvious pitch on the planet right now. My problem with Bitcoin is like once I accept that as my thesis, like I immediately go and look at other stuff that's just going to go up more, and like I want to make as much money as possible, and I also don't think the risk is like that bad in it. But I think it's interesting actually, like if you can attach like a Bitcoin layer 2 thesis to that, because now I'm like, oh, it's kind of like the Bitcoin thesis, but actually it's like a high beta Bitcoin thesis that's sort of directly tied to the Bitcoin thing. Like I can get behind that. Like, but is there anything I can buy
Like a
right now?
Stacks like token?
First off, I guess what do you think about Stacks? Is Stacks like even a good investment? Like, is that like a real L2? I don't know. Like, I actually am.
And you might have to put on your middle curve hat for this. investment.
I gotta bang myself with the
And don't worry, obviously none of this is actually financial advice.
Yes. Yeah, of course. I personally am not really kind of like a Stacks fan. I mean, I don't mind them because I think that they're some of them in the community are trying to build towards the kind of like right ethos of like open up this expressivity on kind of Bitcoin, but I just don't think the Stacks layer is going to be able to kind of compete with these actual kind of ZK rollups that are coming. I don't think that they've really kind of garnered like a huge developer interest, and I can tell you that they are like absolutely hated and despised by like the core Bitcoin community. At least some of these other things, like they're hated as well, but like I think people are at least like, okay, like ZK is kind of cool. Like OG Bitcoiners used to talk about that. Like maybe we can do this without a token. Like that stuff is like modestly interested. Like people are like the Bitcoin purists are hard pass on
You
Stacks.
guys,
but
you guys
Stacks
hate.
has done
You guys just
exceptionally
hate
well.
tokens, right? Sorry,
Well-
I'm gonna you guys as in Bitcoin
Yeah.
fans.
Yeah.
I don't.
Say
You're
it
not
again.
you're not a Bitcoin fundamentalist. I know. You're not an evangelical, but like Bitcoiners in general like don't like tokens, and Stacks as a token, and I feel like that's like a big reason why people don't like Stacks, because there's this like perception that these tokens you don't need a token and tokens are abstract. I've always thought this is like very stupid. Like I understand some of it. It like I think this is an interesting discussion because this is actually flowing through to some of the L2 Ethereum ideas I want to talk about, but like.
Well, did you want my other two investments?
Yeah.
I want that more than whatever Steven was going to ask.
No, I was gonna kick it back to him.
Well, because
Okay.
once you guys get me going on the Bitcoin thing, it's like
Let's
it's gonna be
like,
game
all
over.
right, sorry.
You know,
sorry.
so well, I will
gonna
say the
keep
second
edging
thing
on
that I'm
the
actually
L2.
invested in that I took a lot of interest is nuclear energy.
Okay.
I personally invested in a company out in like Copenhagen that's doing kind of like a lot of the very kind of like bleeding edge science fiction stuff around, you know, kind of like modular salt reactors and thorium.
Smaller modular ones.
Yeah, and it's like this grand vision, and who knows, it could like totally go to zero and whatever. But like, I do think that the world is kind of opening up to nuclear. I do think that if we hit this kind of inflationary crisis, oil starts going up, energy starts going up, it starts perpetuating on itself. People are looking around and being like, dude, we need cheap energy. I don't give a shit about like whatever concerns you have. So I think nuclear is like very interesting.
Is there a ticker in that one, or is it a private?
It's a private company.
Okay, private company.
And you know, just like for people that want to know, it's like I like randomly like. I won't say who. I like hit up somebody on Twitter and I was like, "Hey, this is like really cool. Like, can you connect me with like the CEO?" And they're like, "Yeah." And it's just like,
That's how you got in the deal?
yeah. So I mean, it's like, you know, you miss every shot you don't take. You know, it's like, why not?
What is a thorium reactor versus a normal reactor? Without going like, you know, totally off the reservation, but like I don't know anything. Do they use like a different, like it doesn't use uranium?
Exactly. Yeah, most
Is
reactors.
thorium like an element?
Yeah, thorium's like super abundant in Earth's crust.
It just sounds like something that the Marvel universe made up.
Right. Yeah. It's up there with like adamantium and like, you know, what's the stuff from Wakanda?
Or Dune, the
Unobtainium.
Yeah, the spice. Yeah.
Spice, yeah.
Totally spice vibes.
Wait, can you is there a thorium ETF? Like, can you buy uranium? Like, obviously uranium is an interesting trade that people have been taking, and it's been actually finally doing pretty well. But like, can you trade thorium? Is that something you know about? I've never looked into this.
I really don't know much about it, but my understanding is that one of the benefits of thorium is that like it's very abundant in Earth's crust, and so if like you have a commodity that has like whatever it is, like the low, you know, like stock to flow, whatever, where like, you know, they can essentially mine it relatively easily. So I imagine
probably
like,
a bad investment to
right,
but maybe like a
right.
company that mines it might be okay.
Maybe. Yeah. Food for thought. But I mean, the basic premise is like, you know, you need some sort of material that's like fissible or whatever, where like you essentially throw a neutron out and it breaks apart and starts like the reaction. And thorium, you can almost like kickstart the reaction with like a small little bit of like uranium waste, and then the thorium can kind of like perpetuate itself and create like a different form of uranium. And so the point is, it's like you don't really have the same kind of radioactive waste or kind of like the downsides of uranium. And then there comes to things with like kind of like, you know, a pressurized water reactor, like traditional nuclear reactors. You put uranium in there, and then there's kind of water around it. And then as the uranium heats up, it creates energy, but it boils the water. In order to prevent the water from boiling, they pressurize it. But all of a sudden, if you have like something under a fuck ton of pressure, it can cause explosions. So like a lot of these kind of newer models, it's like trying to use thorium, which is like people say is a better type of fuel. It's trying to modularize the reactors so that you could just like put them in a storage container and ship them around the world instead of having these like giant things that cost $50 billion to build, and you know, these big
10 years and 15 years of build.
Yeah, huge things. And some of it's a pipe dream, but you know, it's like maybe it's a noble, cool thing to kind of go after.
So fat pitch if you're a VC maybe, but like hard to invest in still for like a
Yes,
the retail guy.
I think that's a fair assessment. There are, I don't really want to like share because like I don't know how big it is and how credible it is, but like there is like I invested in like a small nuclear like angel rolling fund. Like on AngelList, they have those rolling funds that do like quarterly, and there's one that's kind of like, because there's not much kind of like venture capital that goes into nuclear projects, because usually it's like there's such moonshots and they require such just like a billionaire that's like bored as hell with their time, and it's like, I'm gonna, you know, build this thing out. But there's starting to be like small little things like that.
I mean, I'd love to like take a bet not on that part of the value chain, like the core part, like the actual reactor part, but something ancillary in the value chain where they actually realize profits at a much faster rate, because it seems like time to profitability, time to distribute actual cash is so far in the future that I don't know, like if you discount those cash flows, is it really?
There are companies, and stop me if I'm going off the rails here, but like one company I looked at, they have like a superior type of like fuel instead of like the uranium, and so it burns like, you know, more efficiently. And, you know, if they can go out and get like the approval for that, and then all the pre-existing nuclear reactors, like you don't need to go and build, you know, new nuclear reactors, you don't need to build these modular things. You could just say, hey, here's a better type of fuel. And if it kind of like, you know, has passed all of the safety standards, all of a sudden it's like you become the premier provider of this fuel. And that type of business is almost a royalty type of business where you don't have like the mass expenses of building up this plant. You just say, hey, we're going to sell you the fuel, however much energy units, megawatts, or whatever the unit is, like you produce, you're going to pay us a royalty on that. And that's like a potentially dope cash flowing model.
Right. Love that. You said you had 2 more fat pitches. You got a third?
Well, one I actually stole from Arthur Hayes, which is kind of like depressing, but I thought it'd be funny. You know, he's just
we love depressing but funny here.
Arthur Hayes is actually
kind of our sweet spot.
Invested in a like a sex doll company because he's convinced that society
this is so us. Yes, keep going.
Is kind of going down this like nihilistic path, and you know you're gonna have all of these incels that like can't get laid, and they're gonna be wearing their fucking Apple goggles, and they like, you know, they have their vices. And so Arthur Hayes, you know, is like a great investor, kind of a character, but you know. I don't think I'll be investing in that one, but you know, hey, whatever the people want.
All right, so to summarize, your fat pitches: Bitcoin, thorium, and sex dolls.
I would say broadly nuclear, but yes.
Yes, okay. That's less funny.
Thorium.
I like how he caveated the nuclear one, not the sex dolls.
Yeah, but the third one you got nailed it.
You nailed it.
BTS, baby.
I did
BTSD.
I did
BTSD.
I did bookmark.
Bitcoin, Ethereum, sex dolls.
Oh yeah, okay, perfect.
I bookmarked a tweet that had a list of AI OnlyFans, not as a user, but I was like, man,
for research, of course.
Yeah, these are definitely going to make money. Like they're undoubtedly, and along the same lines that Arthur Hayes was thinking. And I was looking at some data on the LTV expectation of these. Off the fucking charts, better than any subscription you've ever seen. The stickiness of your digital girlfriend is
careful with your world short.
Yeah. Anyway, I'm bullish that. I don't know what form, but
oh my god,
love it.
Inconceivable amounts of alpha being dropped right now.
Steven, hit us with yours.
Look, I think people know what mine is, and like I would be lying like if I didn't say what it was, because like this is where my money is. Like, and as you alluded to, for me, the fat pitch is Ethereum, and this is like a 1 to 4 year fat pitch, right? Which I know in crypto world is like a freaking eternity, right? And I know like some people are like, oh, it's like $3,400 now. It was like $800 before, but like $3,400 now, or maybe it's 33 now. I don't know. I haven't checked my phone in 10 minutes, but is in like honestly pretty good chance you get like 3K again. Like to me, this is like an insane bet because it's not so much the absolute price and like the multiple you get on it. It's like your drawdown from here. Like even if you bought $1,000, right? When Ethereum was $1,000, the max drawdown could have been like $250. Like we were like, things look pretty bleak. Like it was bleak, man. Like you couldn't just like send it at $1,000 because like you might have no money left within like 3 months, right? But like now, like everything is so de-risked from like a regulatory standpoint, right? A lot of the black swans are totally gone, right? And it's sort of like a when, not if with like the ETF. And like we've already seen what's happening with the Bitcoin ETF. And it's like so freaking obvious what is going to happen with the Ethereum ETF.
Just to add on that real quick, I think I saw Larry Fink on TV today being like, asked about if Ethereum is a security. He's like, well, I don't need to comment, but if it is a security, that's perfect for, like he said, that's okay for an ETF.
I mean, like this is like, crypto's funny. Like you keep getting these moments where there's like a trade. It's just like slapping people in the face like over and over again. And like, because it doesn't play out in like 6 weeks, people are like, oh, it's like the price is
2 to 10 minutes. Sir.
The price isn't going up. That's not the trade. I'm going to go somewhere else, which is like hilarious. But like, if you look around you, right, you look at like the ETH Bitcoin ratio, it's effectively bottomed, right? It's been just going sideways at this, like, sure, maybe we run that level for a bit, but like it's basically this is where you want to buy it, right? Not at like 0.09, but right here, right? You've got that. The whole market is like uber pessimistic on the ETH ETF right now, like max pessimism. You just had like a lawsuit FUD last week. Larry Fink he was literally on TV like yesterday, like shilling crypto and like tokenized assets. They put $100 million on chain. They're launching like their own freaking like algo stable coin. It's like, come on, like, what are you looking for? Like, what do you want? Like, where's the price going to go? Like, even if the price is going to go to $2,000, which I think would be obviously possible in crypto, but that's not like a horrific drawdown, right? Versus like your upside is like very, 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 very high. Like if you believe in the Bitcoin fat pitch, which I do because it's such an obvious thesis, then you have to tag along and believe in this, right?
Have you been following the ETFs? I imagine you have been, but I'm curious, like, how you view it, because you're more in the Bitcoin world. Do you see this as like a perpetual flow of money coming into it? Do we break the kind of cycles we've going to, because now we have this TradFi pipe, and let's say all the pipes get connected and they're hooked into 401ks, and every paycheck puts a little money in, and all the money managers have access to it in their platforms. Does this break us out of a, typical 4-year cycle that we've seen in the past?
I probably don't have like a super hot take on this. To answer your question on ETFs, yes, they've been like super impactful. They've had like crazy flows. There's still, in theory, a lot more money to come from like the RIAs and stuff like that. On the cycles, like on one hand, I am like sympathetic to the idea of like the efficient market hypothesis that like everything is essentially priced in. But like the reality is kind of disconnected from that, where it's like, but these cycles like are continuing to happen. I do think like just naturally as the market cap gets bigger, as you kind of exhausted these kind of like whales, just like causing these volatility spikes, and like, I don't know if your guys' audience knows like how the halving actually like works, but it becomes like less and less impactful.
I think they're
keen.
I think the hardcores. I think like our Discord community is like
okay.
They know this.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's that like the block issuance right now is like 6.25 BTC. Like this happening, go to like what if that is like 3.125 or something. Mm-hmm. It's like the discrepancy from like pre-halving to post-halving of like how much Bitcoin is like being flown into issuance and like causing more issuance is like becoming smaller and smaller. So it's hard to think that these cycles will like continue, right? At least to the extent that they have.
Do you subscribe to the idea that cycles in crypto are?
I was just reminded. Did you see the Robert Kiyosaki tweet?
No, I didn't.
Oh my God, I should have added that for this. I couldn't tell if it was a troll. Jimmy, can you find the Robert Kiyosaki Bitcoin tweet? It was so bad that like wasn't sure.
Bitcoin, right?
Yes,
he's a big golden.
But it was like
okay.
It was like, is this like absolute 5-dimensional chess like engagement farming? Just search halving, but spell it like have, like HAVING. Like go on his like if you can search that.
While he looks for that, do you have the tool that undoes?
Oh, the thing that opens the beer.
Yeah,
here you go.
Thank you, sir.
Here. I'm gonna wait to see if Jimmy can find it. He tweeted it like 2 or 3 days. Oh, there it is. Yes. Oh my God.
All right.
Wait, that's not the full tweet. Where's the rest of it?
Why is it a?
Are there multiple ones? That's the tweet, but there were like 10 tweets in the thread. Can you find the rest of them?
Jimmy, you're doing a great job on the spot, by the
way. So he basically tweeted like, I'm buying 10 more Bitcoin in April. Why? Because of the halving, misspelled like HAPING. and then he's like,
there it is. Wait, scroll up.
Where?
Latest. Oh, sorry. Too far out.
No, I think it's the one you brought up. Like can you just? Yeah, it's a screenshot.
You have to like search it or something.
Oh.
Wait, click back on it.
It's a damn screenshot.
And on
rig.
Okay, yeah.
While he's looking for that, Tyler.
Anyway, what's funny about it is that like he's. Well, sorry, do the Tyler.
I was gonna say Tyler mentioned in the chat. Shout out Nick for buying my Rich Dad Poor Dad copy 15 years ago. It's I still think that's a good book for people to read, to understand like early on, like owners versus non-owners.
This is it.
All
if
right.
the Bitcoin process works as designed and you buy 1/10 of a Bitcoin, you may have a whole Bitcoin by the end of this year.
What?
This is like a thing before, like this is like a classic tweet from like 2017 or something. Like there's this
Wow.
like celeb, like this like
that
internet
halving happens,
influencer.
like, we'll all have twice as
Well,
many
people was
Bitcoin.
like, so how does Bitcoin work? Like if I buy like,
What does he think?
if
It's
he
a
buy
stock
like,
split?
like he was asking like if he bought like
Well,
0.2
even that
and it went
wouldn't
up
make
5x.
sense.
He's like, if I have 0.2 Bitcoin and it goes up 5x, do I have 1 Bitcoin? And people are like, what are you talking about?
It just shows you that intelligence is not correlated.
But
with
this
net worth.
this is what he's
you know.
so he's like writing this. I'm like, is this like a next level troll where he's like citing this like old lore? He's like, you might have a whole Bitcoin if you buy 1/10 of it today because of the halving.
Wait, are you sure he wasn't saying like
No, he's
dollar
definitely not
value
trolling.
wise?
No.
it's gonna go up 10x.
That's what he was probably trying to say. He's boomer. you
And
know?
Andy, the best is he spells the halving like HAVING in the tweet.
Not in having.
It's just like full boomer.
All right, you threw one of us off a tangent.
Oh my god, yeah, I know, but it was a funny tangent. God bless Robert. What were you guys talking about?
Let's see. We're talking about the 3 investments. We're talking about your Ethereum pitch.
I was gonna ask you if you think the cycles that we've had so far are they crypto cycles in nature, like we
Oh,
go
yeah.
through this boom bust, or is it just they just so happen to coincide with these macro liquidity ups and downs?
Yeah, I don't know, but I know exactly what you're referring to, where people have kind of like looked at the analysis and they said, well, these are just like, you know, and they are like typically correlated around like elections too. And like, you know, when you go into an election year, like there's uncertainty. So people kind of look into these more speculative type assets. They also like typically, you know, you're kind of like pumping the economy up. You're making sure gas prices are low. Like liquidity is a little bit looser. I don't know. And some people are like, oh, Satoshi was such a genius. Like he planned it all around like the presidential cycles. And like, I you know, I don't think any of that is true.
I love the Bitcoiners and like the
lore, the mystery. It's all about
just
the
like-
kind of like lofty philosophical. There always
Was it
has
like,
to be like
a
some
little
deeper meaning.
Illuminati ish?
it's literally a cult. It's like so funny.
I mean, it's the OG meme coin.
It's just like like everything Satoshi did is like unbelievable. It reminds me of like the Trump stuff where people like post all these like crazy Trump conspiracies that are like 32 dimensional chess. It's like there's like 19 threads. Like, oh, the plan's coming together, and it's just like, no, he's not doing that. What are you talking about? That was just an accident.
I do agree with you that it's for sure over the top.
It's a little over the top.
But in their defense, I will say there is like something like mysterious and amazing and beautiful about this guy, like, you know, Satoshi, who kind of like released this into society and then he stepped back. And it's kind of like, especially now, you know, you have like all of the status and the money and the fame and like all these kind of accolades, these mimetic desires that we crave. And he like stepped back, and it's like almost this like ego disillusionment, right? You know, it's almost like, you know, being on like a mushroom or a psychedelic trip, but like in real life, in the monetary system. And I think that's like pretty dope.
Yeah, it's amazing because it's basically like a tie-in to like a religion. This is
I was-
like a
I was just
religious
gonna say,
trope,
this
right?
fits,
It's
like,
just like fits like
Jesus,
there's
Muhammad,
yeah.
like, Satoshi.
There's like
it fits
something in the human brain that is wired to like love this shit, and like it creates.
And
this,
on the
like,
third day, he rose
crazy
from the dead.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and that's what it is.
That is true. I
you
think,
know?
what is Nick Carter? It's like eschatology. Or I can't even say the word, but like, yes, basically saying that there's like a creation myth.
Yeah, like it's just a thing that works with human brains. It's like why cults all have certain kind of things that make people
It's a
get into
software
them
bug
and
that
stay
we
in
were
them.
predisposed to.
Yeah, we got these bugs, and when things tickle the bugs, like, or maybe it's not a bug. Maybe that is a feature, depending on how far down the rabbit hole you want to go.
I actually think, and not to like, you know, derail this, but like Eric Wall talks a lot about this with his like fascination with like Richard Hart and like the Hex people, you know, and they do see him as this kind of like cold
I
leader. And
love the Richard Hart.
It is like
Eric
such
Wall
a fascinating
thing.
study
It's
on
so
like
good.
human psychology, and it's just like, whoa, like these people like are in a cult and they do see him as this kind of god. Like, did you guys watch the documentary?
No, I
documentary?
forgot. Actually, I wanted to watch that.
Well, everybody put it on your list. Like,
Oh
like,
my God.
for like a random crypto documentary, it's like you're like, this is like really entertaining, you know, and you see how fucking batshit crazy the people are.
I used
You
to
get credit for
watch
bad
Richard
form.
Hart YouTube videos when I first kind of like really got into trading like shitcoins in 2017. And like he would like just kind of do these like monologues and stuff.
Yeah.
He's clearly like a very smart guy.
Totally.
Is he?
Yeah.
I haven't like watched extended videos.
He's
of him.
clearly very smart. He's a marketer. Like I think he was selling like scam pills on the internet.
No. He
in his like OG days.
He was known as the spam king of like the U.S. Like he was known for like doing like direct mailing campaigns and just like spamming the shit out of people. And so a lot of like I think the Hex marketing, I'm sure somebody will correct me if I'm wrong, stemmed from like him just like blasting these things out to really kind of like the most destitute parts of society of like, you know, kind of trailer
I mean, they
parks
did
and-
stuff that's like unforgivable.
Yeah,
they
no,
did direct like mailers to people.
Yeah,
like,
yeah,
getting them
exactly.
to buy- yeah, it's
His
very-
name
very
isn't even
bad.
Richard Hart. That's
Was
a
the whole
pseudonym.
like I'm rich thing kind of a ploy, or is he that like
No, he's
No,
rich.
he's exorbitantly rich. For sure.
He was on chain just buying $1 billion of ETH like with some DAI the other day. You know, he was just.
so he's actually that annoying.
Yeah, totally.
Oh,
Okay.
he has
All right. It's
incredible.
not like,
yeah, he's
He's
rich
like a
for sure.
genius saying, "Well, this is part of my game plan."
I'm sure
is
there
to
is
look-
actually some like genius stuff going on there as well, but he's also just a total tool.
Yeah.
I think at a certain point in time, like you're like, oh, I'm doing this to craft this thing, but then like it just it becomes you. Like you're just playing the role for so long, maybe, and then like you're just like you just lose the plot.
I'm curious what you think about Steven and I's kind of ETH as a fat pitch right now, and what's priced in and what's priced, or what's priced and what's not. Is that same as obvious to you, or do you see like some holes in it?
I like ETH. I really do. Like I like admire kind of like what the community is built on the kind of like technical side. Like I don't think it has like the monetary properties and the brand that kind of like, my core thesis of like that global sovereign debt crisis and Bitcoin kind of like fulfilling that role. Like I don't think ETH can quite compete on that level, but goddamn, like they've really put some like impressive stuff in place. My worry and concern for ETH is that some of this stuff is like already known. It's already like priced into the market. You don't have that kind of like information asymmetry. Like everybody kind of knows, and they kind of assume that like ZK rollups are going to be the future. It's going to scale. You're going to have this kind of internet bond that the bankless guys think about, or like the triple point asset thesis. And markets are forward looking. It's kind of like what's the next narrative? Like they got past the merge, they got past all the EIPs. And now it's like you really just have the kind of like boring stuff. Like, is there really going to be a narrative like if they hard fork and put in like inclusion lists like into like the Ethereum code base? Like, does anybody really fucking care about that? And I think that could be an uphill battle. And eventually these things are going to have to stop relying on kind of like hype or the next thing. And you're going to have to get down to it's like what is the actual like app and what is the use case? And I mentioned this like on the Bankless podcast where those guys did such a good job of articulating it, where it's like, hey, like block space, like we're gonna figure that shit out. Like execution environments and like ZK, like we're gonna figure that out. But it's like, where are the fucking apps? Like, what are all these different use cases? And I think it's a much harder to pitch to see what the kind of additional use cases are beyond money. I know Steven and I have talked about like gaming. Like I'm not as much sold, but like maybe I could see that thing like enforcing like the property rights and all of that stuff. Are they going to own like NFTs? It's like, well, no, you have Solana, and then maybe you have like the inscriptions thing. So I don't know. It's kind of like, has Ethereum like out innovated themselves a little bit? I don't know. I don't have a hot take, but that's
Yeah.
I
mean, you and I have talked a lot about this, and like you're very different from me in that like I am always thinking about like I appreciate the technical stuff. Like I do, I really do. But like I am primarily in this to like make money for sure. Like I definitely am, but like I have a heart, and like I do have like I do like the space, like irrationally so, and I do have like ideas, and like I do believe in it.
I just
right?
weighted averaged your percentage about making money and the percentage that goes to your heart, and it was like a 99.9 to like 0.1%.
Like the fact that
the Grinch, his heart like grows like 3 times over.
Yeah. The fact that I still own a CryptoPunk and I didn't just market by dog with hat like shows you that like I have like a heart. Like I know that 100% certainty that if I just liquidated my punk like 2 weeks, 3 weeks, or a month ago when I started going on like the Uber meme train, like I have no doubt in my mind that it may have like 10 times as much money. But I just like
at right now?
I'd like the
50-ish.
Yeah.
Okay. Sorry. Go on.
Yeah. But like I just like I do like have like a part of my soul is there, right? And like I like that, right?
Yeah.
But like you are definitely like a technology guy. You're definitely a like culture guy. You're very high, like you're like when Nick is like, well, why do you think this won't outperform? Like I actually feel like you're not thinking about it that way. You're not like, oh, I want to invest in Bitcoin because it's going to like outperform ETH. Like you genuinely believe in like the ethos more. You believe, you see the end game, and it's like for you it's not like tied to like what's going to make the number in my bank account go up. It's actually not really like a huge input in your thought process from like what I've gathered. Like in like obviously you think it's going to go up, but if I told you like, well, ETH's going to go up like 50% more, you'd be like, well, I don't know about that, and like I just believe in this, right? I'm not looking at it that way.
Yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head. Like I originally kind of got into this, I would say like for the money, like anybody else. But then when I kind of understood like the underlying revolution, and that was so close to kind of like during my peak impressionable years in college, I was just like kind of latched onto that. And you called me kind of a technology person, which is like very flattering, but I'm definitely not. For me, the technology is a means to an end. You know, like that ultimate kind of like monetary revolution. You know, fix the money, fix the world. Technology is just a mechanism to get there. You're also correct that like, you know, I'm not going to look at these things and be like, oh, I think like ETH has better kind of like, you know, potential returns. For me, like I'm not much of a trader. Like I sometimes feel in those environments that I'm more of the prey rather than the predator. And it's kind of like maybe that you can like get higher returns during a bull if you go into these coins, but it's like when do you ultimately sell? Like I don't know when the right time is to kind of like top ticket. I also don't have the will to kind of monitor it that closely. And I'm also like very worried about like tax implications. Like I don't know everybody else, like I pay my fucking taxes. And so like if you've ever like, you know, traded fucking crypto and you're like taxes are hell, man.
Yeah.
You know, and so for me, like if I just have deep conviction in Bitcoin and I'm like, this is going to be pretty, I think it has the best chance of any crypto of being successful. And I still think it's going to make enough money for me to be happy. And I don't have to worry about the taxes because I'll literally never sell and I'll just borrow against my Bitcoin.
Oh, I'm glad you mentioned that because I want to ask you, like, are you on the sailor side of the mechanism when people ask you, like, are you going to take some money off the table? And you just give a annoyed sigh, like you don't get it. Like I denominate in Bitcoin, it'll always be in there. I don't want to hold fiat. So are you on that end and kind of borrowing against it, as I assume what Sailor would do, or sell his shares in MicroStrategy? Are you along those same lines?
Yeah, I mean, I personally don't borrow against my Bitcoin because I don't necessarily need to. And
Have you ever sold your Bitcoin? Like,
no.
Yeah, that's what I want to get to.
Right. Yeah, no, I've never sold, and I am very pro giving people the option to borrow against it. Like credit and borrowing in finance is kind of like a taboo topic in like hardcore Austrian economics and kind of like, you know, the Bitcoin underlying philosophy. But I very much think like credit and finance will exist. And one of the things is like I used to own like a private money fund, which like we didn't talk about. So I'm very familiar with kind of borrowing and lending and credit and kind of like the shadow banking system and all of those like fun topics. But I do think that there is a necessity to kind of provide like some sort of decentralized service to borrow against like your Bitcoin. Even if you don't think it's money, it's collateral. And Sailor would think that. Sailor's position is that it's more of property rather than currency. So it's like the medium of exchange, the sending of it, that's like an added benefit. But it's like having that store of value property and then being able to borrow against that forever, like all the rich billionaires do on their property, is cool. And seeing things like, you know, the original pioneers, of course, like Maker and DAO, but like Liquidity, and now that they've announced like Liquidity V2, is just like is like a beautiful, like I would say almost perfect like protocol for like borrowing against your collateral.
Sorry, is that a ETH or Bitcoin native?
Liquidity, for the people who aren't familiar, is basically like it's like a stable coin backed by Ethereum, but it's like kind of OG Maker. Like, you know how MakerDAO now has like USDC as collateral, and they're kind of like holding treasuries and stuff, and it's not like Liquidity is like, well, last I checked anyway, it was like pure crypto. Like it's backed by ETH. Right.
I'll give like a quick recap. Yeah. So Maker initially kind of like came on the scene and said, hey, you can put, you know, your ETH collateral into this, and then you can mint this new token called DAI, which is a stable coin. You know, ultimately DAI broke during kind of the COVID crash, not because the peg went below $1, like a Terra Luna type thing. It actually went over peg, where people were trying to buy the DAI to pay down their debt, and that was pushing the price up, which meant more people were getting liquidated. And it was just this kind of faulty auction mechanism. So like when these loans are getting defaulted on, the protocol does some sort of auction mechanism to clear out that bad debt. So that's why MakerDAO said, hey, we have to, like, instead of just using Ethereum as collateral, like we got to bring in USDC as collateral, like if we want to save this protocol. And so they did what they had to save the protocol. And that's why DAI is not really kind of decentralized anymore, and it shifted more toward real world assets. Like it kind of like gave up. It was almost kind of like the DAO attack. You know, they had to kind of give up on this like ethos of decentralization a bit. So this other protocol, Liquidity, essentially came in, and they took that base idea of DAI, but they swapped out the auction mechanism, like the mechanism that clears out kind of the collateral, where if I put $1 million of collateral in and I borrow, say, you know, $500,000, and then the price drops and my collateral has to get liquidated, the process for that to happen changes in Liquidity. And in my opinion, they built like a really beautiful product that essentially, like, the way it actually works is you can borrow with 0% interest and like perpetuity. There is like a small origination fee, like 50 bips and something. But there is like one other flaw with the protocol. I don't know how deep we want to get into it, but essentially, like, if if I borrow in liquidity and I get these LUSDs and I send them to you guys, and then all of a sudden you're like, well, hey, this thing's supposed to be worth $1. Like, I want to make sure it's worth $1. You could take that back to the protocol and be like, hey, give me $1 of Ethereum in return for this stable coin. And so the protocol would burn that stable coin, and then it would give you $1 worth of ETH. But that $1 worth of ETH is coming from my collateral. So it would technically, when you redeem that, it would pay down my debt. So that's good. It's lowering the debt that I owe on my line of credit, but it's also selling some of my Ethereum. So the long short of this is Liquidity V2 got announced, and they've fixed some of these problems. And I think that it will be a kind of like end game protocol that can do two things. That can allow you to borrow against your collateral, and as a byproduct of that, it mints this kind of like decentralized stablecoin.
So still 0% interest?
Well,
with the origination fee?
That will be the change in the protocol, is you can choose your own interest. And so what will happen is that example I gave you where somebody goes to try to redeem the stablecoin, it will redeem from the people paying the lowest interest rate. So if you don't want to be at risk of being liquidated, you will pay a higher interest rate. There's a bunch of other ways that you can ensure redemptions don't happen. We're probably getting into the weeds.
Yeah. We're getting too into the weeds now.
He had me
I
at
wanna,
0% interest.
I know.
So it was interesting.
And I think it's very interesting, but I don't want us to get like off the I think there's like a really important thread here that I want to tie together, right? Like it was very obvious to me talking to you that so for people who don't understand like why I'm like iffy on Bitcoin, I really like Ethereum, right? I was never into this whole idea that like Bitcoin is just gonna like replace the entire money system, but everybody just buries it in their backyard, and like we didn't have smart contract. There's no Uniswap on Bitcoin. There's no bar lending. And then when I looked at like what's happening in the world, like everybody is using stable coins, right? They're not really using Bitcoin. Like they're like, sure, they buy it and hold it, but like when people use crypto, like use it, they're using stable coins, like stable coins on Tron mostly, but like still like Ethereum and Solana, right? Like can settle like tons of this stuff. So I'm like, okay, this is kind of like the use case. Bitcoin doesn't see this. I'm also seeing this like merging of like TradFi and crypto, and like it makes more sense to me in ETH world, right? So I was like, okay, like Ethereum makes sense. Bitcoin, I'm still confused by. But when I talked to David, like he was like a Bitcoiner, but he's very into this idea of like DeFi in a way that like we think about it. Like, and he's very into this idea of like stable coins, which I think is really interesting because stable coins in my mind are like the killer app of crypto, and like having a world where you have like some sort of like base collateral layer, but then also stable coins is like obvious to me. And that's like why I think like you really like Liquidity and like why you're really into all this, right? So and you see this working like on Bitcoin in a way that I never thought would be a thing before, which is why it's interesting to me. And like we're talking about, you know, like 4-year, 5-year investment theses. Like, what do you want to buy and hold? Like for like spot backs, like, do you want to buy Bitcoin? Do you want to buy ETH, and why? So this is like an important discussion to me, because in a world where Bitcoin can actually do all these things that I thought it was not going to do, because like I actually think a lot of the, you know, the core community is like off their rocker. But like if that is possible, then like I have to reevaluate my own thesis, because it's the main reason like I invest in ETH. And like if Bitcoin can do all the ETH stuff via layer 2s, as I think you know sort of like postulate, then it's worth talking about. So I think that's like the main thread here.
Yeah. And so which one do you want to talk about? I wrote down like a couple, kind of talking about that kind of like the vision for this kind of, you know, Bitcoin financial ecosystem and stablecoins and property, or do you want to jump into kind of like, what is this layer 2 revolution? How the hell is it possible? What does it mean?
I think I want to start off with the idea of how do like the biggest thing for me on ETH is the fact that like we can do stable coins. Like I love stable coins, like and stable coins are a big thing. How does that invest? Like nobody thinks of stable coins on Bitcoin right now, right? Like it's just like,
I do.
Is it? I mean, you do, right? But it's not a thing I was thinking about. But you're like, we can have stable coins on Bitcoin. I think we have them via Bitcoin L2s.
Yeah, and what's the expectation? Because I don't know when the roll-up thesis started in the ETH community, but how many years ago it was. But
Sorry, we saw Rectum's comment.
All right, we got chat comments to address. So,
Bulk testosterone powder.
first of all, David has long brain as a comment. I think that means you're smart,
Lorg,
David. That's a
Lorg
compliment.
brain.
Lorg brain.
Lorg brain.
I'm
Oh,
assuming
lo-
that's a
oh,
compliment.
Lorg brain.
Oh wow.
Lorg brain.
I used to use Bitcoin for the purpose of sending it to China for bulk testosterone powder to make juice. All right.
Haven't touched it since. Bitcoin, not steroids.
Nice, that was pretty good.
So I don't know. I guess update people who are kind of like Steven mentioned, not aware this is even possible. Is it possible, and when could we expect to have stable coins on a Bitcoin layer 2, I assume?
Yeah. So, even as early as back in like 2014, like kind of like before Ethereum even existed or right around that time, they had written papers called like side chains. Like the original side chains were an invention of like Blockstream, which is kind of like a hardcore Bitcoin company. And so there are Bitcoin side chains, which are essentially just separate blockchains that have EVM compatibility. They were like the OG EVM, forks. And so they still use Bitcoin as kind of their native currency, but the problem is it's a wrapped form of Bitcoin. And those side chains were essentially like ahead of their time. Like none of the DeFi apps existed yet. It was kind of like trusted rollups and ZK rollups to kind of make the peg trustless didn't really exist. And so nobody really gave a shit. And like the narrative in Bitcoin went towards like Lightning Network, which I think is kind of getting exposed a bit with like its limitations. And then a lot of the stuff in the Ethereum world, people were like, hey, we invented these things, ZK rollups, and like they're pretty dope. So what happened is, long story short, some guy in the Bitcoin ecosystem wrote like a white paper saying, or a research paper, I should say, saying like, hey, we could build these ZK rollups on top of Bitcoin, but it says we're going to need like 2 soft forks to get it done. So it nerd sniped a bunch of us, but it was just kind of like, hey, this will never happen. Bitcoin is just so hardcore, like you're never going to be able to fork anything in. The real kind of breakthrough was this guy named Robin Linus, and just this past December, like 4 months ago, released this paper called BitVM. I won't go into the technical details of BitVM, but the punchline is that you can now add a certain amount of expressivity to Bitcoin. You can do a certain type of smart contracts on Bitcoin. It's kind of clunky, it's kind of inefficient, but it probably will be good enough for us to create a bridge. I mean, this is like a technical bridge and also a metaphorical bridge to get us into this kind of ZK rollup world. And if you can go from the Bitcoin layer 1 and you can cross this bridge using this BitVM, which requires no soft fork, then you can get into all of the crazy stuff that's going on Ethereum. Like once you're into a ZK rollup, you can have any virtual machine, for expressivity and smart contracts. You can start using data availability layers like Celestia. You could start bringing on, any sort of, protocol you can imagine. You can do stable coins. You could do, stateless rollups and fast transactions. Like it kind of opens up this entire world of expressivity. There's some nuance as to limitations that the L1, that the layer 2 inherits from like an L1, like Bitcoin. But generally, it's like this is what's getting everybody really, really fucking excited.
Small technical question. When you say ZK, I immediately think the main feature is privacy, but I think you're thinking of scalability,
right?
Mostly, right?
Right. So ZK stands for zero knowledge.
Right.
Typically, it's a way to prove that a statement is true without revealing the underlying contents. So if Steven sent Nick a payment, it's like you can prove that the payment was valid, meaning that Steven actually did in fact have the amount of money that he said, that you actually received it, that there was no double spends, that it was a valid payment. But now people are using ZK as a term, like you said, for scalability.
Okay, cool.
And ZK is interesting because this is like actual crypto innovation, right?
Hardcore.
Like when people are like,
cryptographic,
what can crypto do that we can't do in the real? Like this is like actually a good example of it,
Totally.
right? Like ZK proofs are like really magical to me. Like this idea that like I can prove all of this stuff without revealing any of like the underlying stuff that happened is like really, really cool. And like you can obviously see the real world use cases to it, which I think is phenomenal. But I think that like what you're saying to me right now sounds like the current Ethereum pitch, which goes something like, we're not going to use ETH-L1. Like ETH-L1 is actually just going to be like the settlement layer. It's going to be like the Manhattan, and then we're going to like build all these suburbs sprawling out from it that all kind of come back to it. But it sounds like you're saying that we can do like basically exactly the same thing on Bitcoin. Can we do exactly the same thing on Bitcoin? Like, is there any difference between like a world where there's a bunch of L2s that settle to Bitcoin versus like a bunch of L2s that settle to ETH? Like if you're a user on those L2s, like does anything feel different to you?
I mean, you can have all the same features. You can have like the kind of like, account abstraction wallets. You can use different, stable coins. You could use different VMs. I will say the caveat though with this kind of BitVM, which again is like the key innovation that like enables this bridge. A true ZK rollup is trustless. Even though none of the current layer 2 rollups, like they all are kind of trusted, run by multisig, they at least have a path to becoming fully trustless. With a BitVM setup, it's what's called trust minimized, or 1 of n. Meaning if you have a normal kind of multisig and say you have 10 people on there and you say 6 people need to sign, you need the majority. It's M as in Mary of n number of signers. It's the majority of them need to sign off. If it's trustless, it's just trustless. You don't have any sort of multisig. With BitVM, you could imagine a kind of multisig, but it could be an arbitrary number of people. It could be 10, 50, 100, 1,000. You only need one of them to essentially be honest in order for that bridge to work. So it's far, far better than a federation or a kind of multisig, but it's not technically cryptographically trustless. A lot of us in the Bitcoin community are like, well, that's probably good enough. And I think what I'm seeing on the kind of investment side and the kind of like the hype that's going on behind the scenes, like I think that is going to be good enough. And if we get to a phase down 5-10 years down the road, people are like, okay, we know we said we loved Lightning and we don't want to do any of these stuff with Bitcoin, but like this is actually really fucking cool, and like we wanted to make it trustless. Then you could soft fork in something to essentially verify a zero knowledge proof. I won't get into it, but that is what would make it trustless. It's a relatively benign soft fork. But even if we don't get that, like we no longer need to like plead to the Bitcoin maxis and be like, please, like see the value of stable coins, and like some of this stuff is like really dope. It's like, dude, we're just gonna do it. Like we don't care.
Right. And from a user standpoint, from a developer standpoint, from an institution standpoint, what's the difference between doing it on ETH versus Bitcoin? Let's assume these layer 2s exist. What do you think the deciding factor? What's the driver of choice between the two? Is it the monetary premium portion of the equation that drives choice?
I do think, and it's too soon to tell, I do think that there's going to be more interest in building out monetary and financial apps on these Bitcoin layer 2s. And I don't know if there's going to be as much like people that are interested in doing, I don't know, gaming on like, something like that, or, like ZK ML and all this kind of stuff, or like whatever the kind of new narrative is. It's like, I think that is going to be the interest. That's like where most of the value in Bitcoin is. Not like people didn't buy it for as like gas for the world computer or something like that. They bought it as, property in Manhattan, as this kind of like pure monetary premium. It doesn't earn cash flows. It's not, governed by a central bank. Like it purely has value because it has monetary premium. And so I think a lot of these things are going to be focused around that monetary use case.
Are you worried at all about time to market? Because like in some market structures, and I think in this one, whoever kind of creates the network effects of developers, institutions, users, they obviously get a head start. And Ethereum has that now. So however long it takes for Bitcoin to make these layer 2s come to realization, does that worry you that Ethereum has had such a head start? Or do you think the monetary premium is enough to coax developers and institutions and users over once they're live, even though it's been, maybe 4 years of layer 2s kind of evolving and kind of capturing market share?
I don't think it's an issue at all for a couple of reasons. One, like in general, the community, whether it's like, the VCs or the developers or the degens, like they're looking for the next narrative. And again, I'll say it again, this like asymmetric bet of like, oh my God, this is actually possible on Bitcoin is garnering a lot of interest. On top of that, like we have to keep in mind, like by definition, all of this technology is open source, right? And it's not like they're going to have to spend 4 years building it from scratch. Like there's so much groundwork that's been laid by like the Ethereum and the kind of modular ecosystem that essentially can just be like ported and copied over. It's not as easy as copying and pasting and stuff. Like, and it is going to take like significant lift, but there's people that are very interested in doing it. And the last thing I'll say is like, you could have made the same argument about like, NFTs. It's like, oh, look, NFTs has been on Ethereum. Like, look at what ordinals and inscriptions are doing. Like those things are on a freaking tear.
That's a good point. Yeah. Marty in the chat actually brought this up, and it's something I've been thinking about. Right? It like I have often in the last like couple months, or maybe it's been weeks. I don't know. Like time is going by very quickly, but I've thought to myself like, okay, am I really going to, if I want to be in a Grail NFT, am I actually going to get a better return on a punk, or would I be better off buying like a Grail Bitcoin NFT? Would I be better off with like a puppet or like a Bitcoin shroom or something like that? And like, if I'm being like just like a cold calculating person, like I think the answer is in a Bitcoin NFT. And I think if you look at what's happened with NFTs, like I do actually think like Bitcoin NFTs have like completely cannibalized, well, maybe not completely, but like significantly cannibalized ETH NFTs. And I sometimes worry that we can look at what's clearly happened in the NFT market and view it as like a proxy for what could actually happen in the L2 world in the future. Like, so like the Ethereum pitch for NFTs, like why would I buy an NFT on Ethereum as opposed to Solana? And the pitch kind of went like, you know, like, oh, well, this is like where all the whales are. And this is like where all the sort of like the ultimate prestiges and like the settlement layers, but actually like people are talking a lot about the barbell thing this cycle, right? The idea that like you should just invest in like Bitcoin and then just like the complete like other opposite end, and that ETH is sort of like mid. And I do often worry there is something to this idea. And I think it's definitely played out in NFTs because like, yeah, there's ETH whales, but the biggest whales are actually on Bitcoin.
Right.
And like, yeah, like ETH settlement is very pristine compared to Solana, but it's like, I'm not going to argue it's more pristine than Bitcoin right now. Like I think you can make a case that in the future maybe, but right now, like clearly not. So it is like middle curving itself on NFTs. I think that is undeniable right now if you look at the market.
I do have a hot take. So I'm not an NFT or an inscription guy, but I don't mind them, teach their own. But I think what's interesting is like there is going to be a scarcity element to NFTs on Bitcoin. Again, like there's only 4 megabytes, every 10 minutes that come up for block space. And because you're not just putting like a hash into the block, it essentially means it's like there's only so much space to create NFTs every 10 minutes. And I think what's going to essentially start happening, especially with these layer 2s that I'm talking about and these roll-ups and people posting zero knowledge proofs into the Bitcoin, like these blocks are going to fill up, and the prices of fees on the Bitcoin layer 1 are going to go up very, very high. It's going to be like, I think what I call, a guy named Alex that I talked to calls it a fee apocalypse. And that's usually when interesting things start happening in Bitcoin, when like people start talking about soft forks, people start getting up in arms, they start getting dramatic, kind of like in Ethereum when Ethereum had its fee crisis. But with Bitcoin, like with inscriptions and NFTs in particular, what I'm saying is like,
do you see this as being like a near term thing? Is this like years down the road, or is this coming like this year? Do you think?
I mean,
very quickly.
This is a very hot take. Like take it with a grain of salt, but I think it could happen within as soon as a year, because just this past December, we start seeing like fees spike up in Bitcoin like a lot because of ordinals. People were minting a bunch of these NFTs on Bitcoin, but eventually you kind of run out of money because it's like, oh, I minted, whatever, 10,000, apes or something. But the way that these L2s that I'm talking about, these kind of like roll up like structures with BitVM and all this fancy, Bitcoin L2 revolution, they still have to post a bunch of data onto the L1. But Bitcoin is going to have, dank sharding where you can extend the block space and stuff. There's a very fixed amount. And those layer 2 rollups have a bunch of VC money, and they're going to be willing to pay for that block space in order to validate their idea. And they're going to be earning fees on the layer 2, which allows them to pay for the fees on the L1. So the bottom line is what I make, the point I'm making is that I do think fees on Bitcoin are going to start going up and staying up sustained. I actually think when people say, oh, Bitcoin has a security budget issue, how are they going to pay for fees? I don't think that's the case whatsoever. I think Bitcoin is going to have tons and tons of fees up. And it's going to be because of this kind of like L2 revolution. And bringing it full circle to kind of your NFT point is I think NFTs on Bitcoin are become a lot more scarce because of how costly it is going to be on the Bitcoin layer 1 and how scarce that block space is going to be.
Okay. This is super interesting, actually. You got me thinking about a lot of stuff. To bring this around to like a trading perspective, we did very well in the fall, like longing like calls on Bitcoin miners, and that like ended up being like a super sick play. We took a lot of profits in December. I actually still thought in January that one of the most interesting trades of the bull run would be Bitcoin miners. I entered a little bit back into that position. I got wrecked a little bit. I realized that like actually this thesis couldn't really play out because everybody had been using the miners as like a crypto proxy, and whatever theoretical thing I had about what would happen in the future was just getting steamrolled in the present, because like all these flows of like all these funds or whoever who bought the miners leading into up to the ETF now selling them, or worse, like longing Bitcoin and shorting them additionally to like capture some sort of spread trade. So a lot of Bitcoin miners are like decimated right now once again, as they have been multiple times. But if what you're saying is true, that not only are fees going to go up, and like so Bitcoin miners have always been like a terrible, right?
Yeah.
Like they like
Your revenue's guaranteed to cut in half every
like
roughly 4 years.
and
the
they
margins are just so razor thin because everybody's competing for the hash rate.
Yeah.
but in a world where ordinals exist, like suddenly that business is like, oh, this is interesting. Like there's actually fees where maybe the market didn't think there would be fees, and now we have to reprice this business model. But what you're saying in addition to that is that in a world where there's a ton of Bitcoin L2s, these L2s like don't care how much the fees are, because they're making so much in fees, and they're just settling there. It's just like a cost of doing business on their bottom line, and that block space is so limited to begin with that we could have this just insane surge in fees on the main layer. And if you're like a Mara or like a Riot or somebody, like you could actually be just printing money in a world where there's like tons of L2 activity, right?
Yeah. There's a couple things to think about. Your general thesis, I think, could be correct. I don't want to get like too technical, but like the way that these layer 2s work, like to be the most trustless version of it, like you want to post transaction data that happens on the layer 2 into the layer 1. And once it gets too expensive, then you start posting data on something like Celestia and this kind of blob space and all of that stuff. So the point I'm making is like these L2s will essentially be, I don't know if it's like the kind of they're kind of like the they will always fill up block space as much as they possibly can until it essentially gets like, you know, the fees are too high, and then they'll say, okay, we're going to go to something like Celestia. But I don't think that there's going to be a thing where they're like, oh, you know, today, like, you know, there's no blocks that are filled, like no fees that were paid to Bitcoin. Like they're gonna, you know, pay it up as high as they possibly can because they want that highest level of security. Everybody's gonna want Bitcoin layer 1 security, because that's how your L2 inherits security, is if you post the data onto the L1. It's only when you need more scalability and the fees go so high, which if that happens, that's a good problem for your thesis, because then you're like, holy shit, these miners are making so much money because the blocks are actually filled.
And it's not so much that they're filled. It's like you can also are there priority fees?
No.
Or anything. Like the miners have a mechanism to make like additional money, right? Like if the blocks are full, but like people are willing to pay even more money to get in that block.
So we're getting into a little bit of nuance here, but even though, so each Bitcoin block, you could put up to 4 megabytes. People think it's 1 megabyte, but you can actually put up to 4 megabytes of data. But the network will only propagate chunks of data that are less than 400 kilobytes. So if you send a big JPEG in there, like you want to do a big inscription, and it's over 400 kilobytes, like it can't be propagated in the network. So you have to do that, what's called out of band, where you have to go up to a miner directly. If you guys are running the mining operator, say, and I go, hey, the next block that you get, put this entire 4 megabyte picture of, you know, a wizard, which is what happened in Bitcoin, into the block. And so it opens up an additional revenue stream.
It's like a bribe, like we have in.
It's a side deal.
And I assume that's something that's on
yes, it's a side deal.
Mara's like balance sheet. That's got to be on there somehow, right?
So Marathon actually just released something called Slipstream. I think it's called Slipstream, and it's this exact thing where it's like, hey, come load up whatever image or piece of data you want onto our website, onto our API, and then we'll put it into the block base. And if it's above this 400 kilobyte threshold to propagate data, we'll take care of it.
It's a super interesting idea.
I like this discussion because my two biggest things were the long-term security budget, you know, because issuance wouldn't be enough, and that, you know, enough for miners to be incentivized, but also the miner business model was like almost fundamentally flawed, where you have to recycle through your OpEx every 2 to 4 years, and then your revenue cuts in half, and it's like, fuck, why would I ever want to be in this business? But if you're saying that transaction volume will be enough where security budget's not a big thing, and that there's another revenue stream potentially for miners in the long run, right? I mean, I assume you're talking multiple years out.
Wait, for multiple years for what?
For like the side deals, Slipstream.
No, he's saying that like
this is like live.
This
It's
is
happening
like
now.
basically
Yeah.
like if things get a little crazy. Like, what I love about this is that there's a lot of like potential convexity in here, right? There's this idea that like the block space is very limited on Bitcoin, so if things kind of fill up and get crazy. They can get
Exactly.
like very crazy.
Exactly.
Especially relative to what's priced into like the stocks and like the revenue they make.
But
Like,
that's good and bad, right? It's good in a way for fees for miners, but does that halt
I'm
user
talking.
option?
I'm talking about this in terms of like
Security.
buying miners, right?
Right.
Like I think the Bitcoin security budget thing that's been being pushed by like ETH people as like not pushed but like put out there. I think it was a legitimate question. Like in my mind, that's kind of dead now.
It's a very legitimate question. I don't think it's valid anymore, though.
Yeah, I agree with you.
Or as valid.
I agree with you. So that's like one reason I'm like a little iffier on my ETH thesis. The second reason, as we talked about, is the idea that we can kind of build all these L2s on ETH, and from like an end user perspective, like it's going to be the same, right? So I do think there is something to this idea that ETH is getting kind of wedged in this like kind of corner where it's like, and again, the NFTs are like a good example of this. Like Bitcoin NFTs are like grails and very rare and scarce, and they have like the whalest of whales like buying them, right? And then Solana NFTs are like the fastest, cheapest, most accessible, easiest to use and everything. And then like you've got like ETH NFTs kind of stuck in the middle right now, which is a concern for me personally. But like I also think this is analogous to what could happen with just like the whole ETH thesis as a whole moving forward, which is like one of the reasons like this we talk about like reevaluating theses, like investment theses as a theme here. This is like the main thing. Like I'm trying to watch like a hawk because like I personally am overbalanced ETH, and one of the reasons I am is purely for tax purposes.
Right.
Like the idea that I'm going to just sell a bunch of stuff now and rebalance and just eat, like it doesn't make any sense to me. Like I have to be like I'm taking like a 30% haircut.
Right.
Like so like I have to be right like a lot, and I don't think like I'm not that confident in it, but like I'm concerned about it. And like anybody who's listening, like we have a very like ETH heavy audience for sure. Like this is definitely a thing they should at least be like thinking about. I'm not like saying this is definitely a thing, but like this was like kind of new information to me, and it's probably new information to a lot of people. So it's like something people should consider.
Yeah, I think that's well said. I mean, I still have ETH. I'm still an ETH fan. I still think it'll be successful, but people need to be aware of what's starting to happen on Bitcoin.
I will. Sorry, do you want to say something?
I was just gonna say I don't want to discount the network effects too much. I agree with you that like NFTs are maybe a good example of like users migrating over, but I don't know if you wipe off the shine of like a new novelty and the fact that there are not that many on Bitcoin. Maybe if you take however many NFTs are on ETH and throw them on Bitcoin, does it lose its kind of, I don't know, novelty and grailness? I don't know, but I do know that in normal business market structures, like network effects are a real moat. And I think ETH is building that against Bitcoin. But now, my original kind of doubts about Bitcoin, you're kind of making me rethink those. And, that kind of comes up to
like maybe bring it home and add something on that I think is like probably less depressing to the ETH people. Like there's sort of a double-edged sword in what I'm saying. Like on the one hand, if I'm saying that the user experience for like a Bitcoin L2 settling on Bitcoin is effectively the same functionally as like an ETH L2 settling on ETH, right? On the one hand, that might be bad because, oh God, we can build all this stuff on like Bitcoin. But the other side of that coin is like, well, if it's just all the same, then like what really matters then? Like, well, things like network effects are really important. The fact that like the Bitcoin developer network, the ecosystem of apps, the fact that like Coinbase, like the most major on-ramp that exists in the world probably from the TradFi world to crypto, is aligned with Ethereum and has its own L2 and is going to shill that. I think that logic cuts both ways, right? And in a world where everything's kind of interchangeable, then like betting on the network effects is actually like a really, really good bet. Like there's not like actually a reason like I can see why Bitcoin would like ultimately win out in a world where like, well, BlackRock's deploying on Ethereum, Coinbase is shilling and pushing Base, and there's this like insane head start in terms of just like the TVL on ETH, the amount of the developer ecosystem, like all this stuff, like ETH is like crushing in all those metrics. So like I still like am fairly confident that like ETH is ultimately the winner in all of that because of that.
But you mean winner in terms of price appreciation and the pace of it.
Well, like I ultimately like adoption from like an L2 standpoint, and then ultimately because of that price appreciation. But like I think my portfolio still the weighting should change more than it is. Like I own a lot of Bitcoin, but I probably would own more Bitcoin than I currently do if like taxes were like a non-factor in light of this information, because it's all like probabilistic. Like I'm not like 100% here and 0% here. Well, sometimes I do that with trade, but like my long-term stuff is like I don't know, right? I actually don't know what the world's going to look like, and I'm trying to place those bets like as best as possible. And to me, this is like an updating of the probabilities is all.
So I got some life questions I want to ask David, but do you have any counterpoints to what Steven said in terms of,
network effects?
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, I'll quickly just kind of say it's a valid point. Maybe it's right. But, the same, that cuts both ways. It's like you're talking about network effects, what has kind of like the largest audience, the biggest market cap, like Bitcoin has its own network effects that are pretty badass, and they're going to be like really hard to overcome. And I think a lot of Ethereum people would acknowledge that. Otherwise, Ethereum would have flipped it. For me, like some of this just goes back to kind of like the idealist in me and the kind of like in it for the revolution, where I'm like, okay, maybe the network effects are going to be a good deal, but like I don't fucking care, man. Like I'm in this, to like separation of state and money, and to kind of bring these decentralized apps for my personal and self-interest, but also I think they're very valuable for the rest of the community. And so even if I think it's going to be this uphill battle for network effects, like I'm still going to go and pursue it. And I think there's more people like us, and I think that we will get back to this kind of core ethos of like, what this revolution like really started on. And I think that will overcome some of the network effects. I do think that there's going to be less interest to do real world asset type things on these Bitcoin L2s. Stable coins, I think, are definitely going to come to these Bitcoin L2s. I don't know how many people are going to want to, issue deeds on a Bitcoin L2. I personally wouldn't really care about that. I have no problem if people do. Maybe ETH owns that kind of like BlackRock financial permissionless modular like approach with real estate and all the other assets. And maybe Bitcoin's like, look, we just want to do all this stuff with Bitcoin as the core collateral.
Right. All right. I think that's a valid point, and you make me rethink a lot of things.
We shifting?
Yeah, I'd like to
going
shift.
live.
Yeah.
Do you want to just cut out the other stuff? Cut out the meme. Yeah, we're getting a little long in the tooth here.
Yeah.
Otherwise,
I want to make sure we touch
hours.
on this because I think it's just as important.
This is the important one. It's also important that I relieve myself. So feel free to do like a very long intro. I'll be right back.
All right. So David, you got involved in, Bitcoin, you said like 2016, 17-ish.
Yeah,
range.
but I mean, I really came hardcore in like that 2020 post-COVID when I understood like the macro arguments.
Right. And before that, you mentioned you had a company before, you sold it. But the conclusion of it is that you reached some, I love this word, post-economics. You reached that state earlier in your life. Right? Like, do you mind sharing how young you are, or just like what generation you're in?
Yeah, sure. So I'm 33 right now. Millennial.
Cool. You're probably on the early end of millennials than we are, but you retired young, and I think that's a lot of things that we talk about in this podcast about retirement and reaching financial, more than stability or independence, but like abundance, right? And it's something we think we want. So it's interesting to talk to someone who's reached that and understand is that actually, what we want? And the first question is, was kind of an early retirement an actual goal of yours? Or did it just happen and you found yourself in this kind of like early retirement phase? And I should add as context to this discussion, not only have you reached that early retirement, but you've kind of chose a life of leisure for a bit. You mentioned to me you played pickleball every day for 4 to 6 hours roughly.
Yeah, too much. You've
kind of opted out of the staying busy option to date. So I don't know, clue us in. What does that life actually feel like, and did you have this goal at a younger age?
Let's see. So, I mean, yeah, for context, like, I sold my company in 2021. It was a small little business. It was nothing grand. I'm not like going out and buying, beachfront mansions like all across the world or anything, but it gave me kind of enough to kind of contemplate that question of like, do I need to or want to go back to work? Tons of other variables can kind of impact that question, but yes, to your point, like it kind of gave me, enough financial freedom. I think your question was like, was it like a goal of mine? I mean, I guess, but not really. Like, I didn't have it where it's like, this is my goal. Like, I want to be, financially free and earning this much income per month or anything like that. If I'm being totally honest, like, I found like a lot of like validation and self-worth in making money. And so, like when I was younger, I worked at Deloitte, classic like bean counter type job, and I was just kind of like seeking and craving more that kind of like mimetic desire that I was like, I want to go out and build something myself. And when I did, and it became like modestly, successful. I mean, part of the reason why I ultimately sold the business is I was like, it's kind of like, what the hell am I doing? It's like it felt good that I was running a business. I was running an investment fund. I had family and friends in there. I was like, earning money on their behalf. Like I could feel that, people thought it was cool what I was doing. But there were days where I was just like, dude, I don't even know like what the hell makes me happy. Like I had a great life. I had like amazing friends and like loving family and like things, but I was like, I literally just don't even like know what makes me happy. And that was when I kind of came to this realization. I was like, like money is just like a means to an end, right? And ultimately like the end game is like feeling like a sense of fulfillment and like whatever that path and like finding that value in life is, and like not going down this like nihilistic path. And I was like reading like Nietzsche and stuff like that.
Oh, nice.
Wow, you went there. All right.
And yeah. And honestly, like some of this like relates to like some of the cheesy Bitcoin stuff, but where people get that kind of like philosophical like empowerment, which I don't know if you guys want to go down that route or not. But your answer question, like, no, I didn't plan on it. I'm very thankful that like I was able to do it, and I wouldn't definitively say like whether like there are some days where I'd wake up and I'd just be like, hey, like I just want to go grab a guitar, like take some mushrooms and like go on the beach or something like that,
Right.
and it's like, you kind of like live this like I'm gonna contemplate the questions of life type thing. And the other days where you're like, dude, like I want to be back in the arena, like I want to be the gladiator, like I want to feel that bloodlust, and like I want to go out and like create something great. And I think like I listen to someone also like Sam Harrison. He talks about like, the mind and the consciousness. It's like a congress of people, and like you're never gonna have this like one unilateral thought that you're like, I'm so like happy and complacent with this one thing. Like you're gonna have all these conflicting thoughts in your head. And so yeah, I mean that's kind of like.
Wait, I want to like play this out. So you sell your company, you get a nice fat pile of cash, contemplating like, do I ever need to do anything again? I don't know. Like week 1, what do you do? Like, what do you wake up like day 1, 2, 3? Like, I'm curious because I've often played this out in my head, like where I just like, yep, number check, and then I'm just like, I'm good. And what do I wake up and do the next day, and the day after that, and the day after that? I think it's like an interesting question. Like, what was that for you? Like day 1, day 5, however, and like how did that evolve?
Well, I kind of like mentally prepped for it again and again. It's not like, I pulled in like $1 billion or anything like that. But like, I was listening to these podcasts. I think of like, Tom Bilyeu and stuff. And he talks about like how like when he sold his company, he's like just refreshing like, the button on his checking account. And it's like, all of a sudden you're like, whoa, like there's some more digits in there, and then you're like, that's pretty dope.
So day 1, F5 on the computer. Okay, check.
Yeah. And, but he actually talked about how like that was like one of the worst days of his life, because it's like you build up this kind of like this dopaminergic energy that like this is going to be like the kind of peak and just like nirvana. And then he's like, oh, and it's kind of like you're like, that kind of dark cloud of whatever your vices are is still following you around, like you still have the same like insecurities. And so don't get me wrong, like I kind of braced for that. And so like I almost just like I got the check, it hit my account, and I was like, okay, like on with my life, like let's keep going. And I didn't really let this kind of like euphoria hit me, because I was very worried that it would, and then I would have this kind of downfall. After that, I did some like, I was still like kind of employed by the company for a certain number of like months, and kind of like facilitating the transition and stuff. So it really wasn't like a huge change. I did eventually start kind of like traveling and bopping around, and kind of I felt like that's what I was supposed to do. I was like, oh, like I just sold my company. Like I should go and just like travel and be a vagabond now.
The book says I travel. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. No, exactly. And like, it was cool. It was fun, but that wasn't it for me, Like whenever I see people, like if I'm on like, dating apps or something, and the girl's like, oh, I just like want to travel and stuff. I'm like, travel is just fucking, it's overblown. It's not that cool. Like what's dope is like living in an amazing city like San Diego, being happy with your life. Like, so that's just my personal preference.
All right, so you did a little bit of that. How long did you travel for, roughly?
Probably about like 9 months.
Oh, damn.
Okay, yeah,
That's a lot of traveling.
Oh, I was just like living in like Airbnb. Like there were points where like, so I had packed up my entire car, because I was living in Charlotte, and I was like, my family's back in California. They're up north a bit. I was like, I need to get back out there. Like, I know Charlotte is not my long-term place for me, even though I like it here. I've formed such good friends. And I just packed up everything in my fucking car, you know? And I was looking at my car. I was like, whoa, this is like literally everything I own in my fucking life.
This is your life in one basket.
Yeah. No. And, yeah. Oh, and then I just kind of popped around and I kind of like traveled all up the coast, starting down in like Miami, and then went all the way up the East Coast. And eventually I did the drive, like, you know, across the US. And in between I had like some opportunities to go to like, you know, some Bitcoin conferences and like speak at some of those. And so, and then I, you know, did a few other kind of like international trips as well.
I love the fact that the first thing that you decided to do was actually something you could have done when you were like broke and like 20, probably.
Just travel.
everything
Just
up in
like
a car
put
and
everything in
drive
a car and drive up and down the country.
Yeah.
You're like, yes, finally. This reminds me of like remember like the tale of the Mexican
fisherman,
fisherman
yeah,
parable.
fisherman tale.
It's like, what will you do when you what would you do when you saw all this
Then you
fish?
can,
With,
like,
well,
leverage
then you
up your
could
company and sell it. And
then you could like move to a town by the beach in Mexico with your family. He's like, yeah, I already do that. And he's like, oh.
So, I mean, I'm most curious about, at some point before that moment, you had a vision of what it would look like. And how did that compare to what reality was post, you know, sale and kind of getting a fat paycheck?
So you're asking, I had a kind of vision of what it would look like.
If you did.
Perception versus
reality. You might
reality.
have a perception of what it might look like.
I think that's actually a kind of deeper question than you meant to ask. And the answer is I didn't really think about it. And that's kind of a scary thing because I was so blinded by this kind of mimetic desire of like, you find success, you make money. And that is what kind of like snapped me out of this kind of matrix. It's like, you know, all of this stuff is like a means to an end. And like, what is the end goal? And I hadn't even really like thought about that in my head. And for some people, it's like, you know, they want to go off and like, you know, be like the deep intellectual. They want to go out and be, you know, take mushrooms. They want to be the sports guy. They want to be, you know, the family man, and they want to have kids. And like, I just hadn't really thought about that kind of like long-term vision. And so again, that was actually kind of like one of the reasons why I sold the company. So to answer your question, like I didn't have a vision for it. And I think when I realized that I didn't, I was just like, I'm just running blind on this thing. And I think that's something that a lot of people probably need to introspect and think about more.
So I've had a handful of friends kind of cross that, let's call it tens of millions and into hundreds of millions. And they kind of reach that similar point. And they've admitted that they've had these, you know, moments of crisis, you know, sadness, depression. And when, you know, you're hearing it, you're like, well, I'm sorry, what? Like, how, why? But they're totally genuine in that emotion they're expressing. And so did you ever have those moments, you know, after the fact?
Yeah, you know, one of my like we have a close family friend of ours who's like, you know, they're extremely well off, you know, and he always jokes, he's like, there's always a bigger dick, you know, and like
there's always someone richer.
Well said.
exactly.
Yeah.
And it doesn't matter like who you are, and it's like you look at some of these people and you're like, you really think that there's like you know, someone that has like more, and there's still that desire, and like whatever the quote is, like, you know, somebody goes into like a party or whatever, they meet all these wealthy people, and he's like, well, how much money do you have? How much money do you have? And he's like, well, I just like, you know, or like how much money. The question is ultimately like how much money is like enough, and yeah, like I think it's if I bring it back to crypto like a little bit, like I do think this is like a very common theme that you see people who've made like huge exorbitant money off of like shit coins or these random things. And they ultimately, like, I think there's quite a few examples of people who have like committed suicide. I think there's just like the general trend of people who are like lacking happiness. I think that is like something that, you know, the Bitcoiners like do rail against, that like some of this stuff like kills the kind of like spirit, like the human spirit. And I do think like Nietzsche talks a lot about this, about like, you know, that idea of like nihilism. It's like he says that, you know, God is dead, and, you know, like religion was essentially captured as a way to like, you know, hold down the man from achieving their like highest form of value. And he has this idea of like the Ubermensch or whatever, which is kind of like the Superman. And I do think that, like, you know, for a man, and you know, women as well, but like, you know, for a man to like feel this, you want to feel this kind of like this higher value in life, this meaning, like there's that expression, it's like you are both like the marble and the sculptor. And I think sometimes people, when they sell their company and they come to this and they're expecting this like grand high, it's like that is ultimately not like what fills the human spirit. And maybe it's not a kind of like deeper meaning question. It's just like an evolutionary question that we always need to have like something to go after. And like we're in this comfort crisis, and like you need hardship in life to feel a sense of purpose. Like maybe it's just on the brain level and like the way the dopamine circuit works, and you get these crazy highs in dopamine, and then you get like the lows. But the bottom line is, it's like, I think there's clear examples of like, if you get soft in life or you get too comfortable, you just you don't become fulfilled.
Is that a Nietzsche thing? I haven't read a lot of them, but is that the idea that you need hardship, or is that something else you're pulling from?
Well, Nietzsche will talk about just kind of, like that man needs to achieve this kind of like higher value, this higher, kind of like pursuit. And he looks at something like religion and Christianity that kind of like champions these virtues and these values that are not like high value in society. That, it's like you kind of champion these things of like, the way he says is that they kind of like the downtrodden class who like they can't get laid, so they put chastity as a virtue, like they can't have money, so they, virtue like poverty. And Nietzsche's like, no, like, look, like you need to like it's dope to be like a Chad that gets laid a lot. Like it's dope to, like be successful.
This sounds exactly like all of like, I don't know if you've seen any of these kind of like alt-right guys that are all becoming like very popular.
Right.
They're all like that. They're like, yeah, I date like 15 women, and like you should expect the same thing, and they should allow it because like I am the Chad. And it's just like this is what this like sounds like.
No, I mean,
so like these rules, these aren't rules for everybody. These are rules for the plebs. Like you are it's very like Andrew Tate. Like that's what this sounds like.
Yes. No, I mean, there's the whole, black pill, white pill, red pill, like all the fucking, movements. And so some of that stuff is a little too extreme for me personally. But I think there is, why people are attracted to some things is because they feel some form of truth to it. It doesn't have to be 100% truth, but they hear it and they're like, something like that, sounds right to me. And like, I think there are like a lot of young men who kind of feel this. They're like, dude, like I want to be strong. I want to be badass. Like I want to be a Giga Chad, And like, again, I don't want to go down like the misogynistic path and like all the Andrew Tate bullshit, but like there is like some semblance of something in there.
Well, I mean, we've talked about on previous podcasts on how we're in this weird part of humanity where all the things that you used to have to fight for are so convenient now, whether it's food, shelter, safety, like everything is available at a click of a button. You don't need to fight anymore for it, generally speaking. And then the things that maybe ultimately control your destiny, you have no agency in. Like, will countries start World War III? Will climate change destroy us all? Like, you don't feel like the things that have ultimate destiny, you actually can't control. So you're in this middle ground where like you don't have anything necessarily to fight for, and you maybe lack agency, which I try not to like agree with in my own personal life. But yeah, it sounds like kind of what you're talking about in the sense that we're in this middle ground. So I don't know, did you have to find that you had to like create your own things to fight for and purpose? Did you have to make up those new things since you don't have to like, I don't know, club anything over the head for food or you know?
Yeah, you talked about this idea of like struggle maybe being like integral to just like not only fulfillment but just like to exist like as like a human. Do you think that's true? Did you find that to be true?
Yeah, well, so it feels like it's true, but what really did it for me is like do you guys know who Andrew Huberman is?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Right. So Huberman's a legend. I feel like I started like listening to him like very, very early on before he became now this kind of like viral sensation. And a lot of his podcasts talked about this idea of like dopamine and the dopamine circuit, right? This idea that like dopamine is the molecule of more. It's what gets you to kind of get up and go and move. But the way it works is like you have this kind of like average baseline level of dopamine. And I'll bring this back to your kind of question.
This is good, by the way. You should listen to some of our previous episodes.
Okay. Can you tell I prepared for this? Winging it. But there's kind of this like baseline level of dopamine that you have in your system, and then when you do some sort of dopaminergic activity, it goes up. But then everything that goes up, like it goes down and it goes further below the baseline. And then you feel that. And when you're above it, you feel inspired, you feel motivated. When you're below it, you feel deprived and you feel addicted. And so when you're below it, you're like, oh man, I'm kind of like craving something. And then you want to do another dopamine hit, which brings you up a little higher, and then it brings you back lower than before. And so over time, your baseline level of just kind of like that dopamine molecule, it just starts to feeling depleted. And I think a lot of this is related to these things that you're talking about with like all this comfort crisis, this instant gratification. Like we get the dopamine hits constantly on our phone, and it's like you don't think you're addicted because like maybe you're not doing drugs or you don't have an alcohol problem, but like you are 100% addicted, and it's acting on that same, you know, chemical in your brain that causes addiction. It's this gradual narrowing of things that bring you, you know, joy and happiness and lack of fulfillment. And so for me, it's like I think a lot of people can feel things that are wrong, but the way my brain works is like I need to understand some sort of like logical reason or scientific reason for it. And when I heard Huberman talk about it, I was like, oh my gosh, like there is actually like a scientific reason as to why there is so much of this stuff happening.
Yeah, I agree with all that. We did an episode like a year ago where we talked about this, and we actually did a dopamine detox.
Oh, nice.
And it was like I did the detox.
It was probably hard.
Yeah.
Armand had sex on day 2. And then Eric kind of went through the whole thing, but then was basically like, this is stupid. I don't understand why they're doing this. Like, I'm happy and now I'm not happy. This is dumb. You guys suck. And, then, and I forgot if Nick cheated or not. I think he cheated too. But
I don't remember if I did. I had decaf coffee. I think that was my closest.
I'm pretty
cheat.
sure you had sex as well. You fiend. So we talked about this.
Humble
but-
brag. Nice.
I just did that.
Yeah, sorry, I can't do my dopamine fast. I'm just getting laid all the time.
Sorry.
But yeah, like I don't know. I think there's something to what you're saying. I think like when you're working or hunting or whatever. What do you have on there?
He mentioned that Huberman
Oh, yeah.
is also
Wow.
apparently a Chad,
Dating
according
five-
to the New Yorker.
Yeah, Armand actually wanted to talk about the Huberman thing tonight because like that. I don't. Did you see was it New Yorker
Is it-
article
is it a hit
came
piece
out?
on Huberman?
They did some
No
hit piece where
way.
he's like a womanizer and everything, and then it's just like
Oh,
It
okay.
started very wide,
Oh,
and
boy.
eventually they left with his.
I'm too much of a Huberman stan, and you know I gotta say innocent until proven guilty. Well,
All
even
right.
is he married?
No.
Okay.
Very, very not married.
Well then,
Apparently.
I don't know. I mean, probably poor form, but he's not doing anything illegal.
Agreed.
Maybe.
I don't
know
want
the
to get
accusations.
I don't want to get into this one right now. I have more
yeah.
questions for David.
Okay.
I have some like burning questions. What problems did you find that money actually solved, and then which ones does it not solve at all?
Yeah, I mean, it is nice just to kind of like, I don't necessarily have to like worry about, kind of expenses and kind of like day-to-day things like that. It's nice just kind of like, I don't know, it sounds dumb, but like you go into the grocery store, it's like, dude, I'm going to get like a $70 Whole Foods, hot bar box, and I don't give a fuck.
Yeah, right, yeah.
But and it's also, it's just small things, like places that you can, live in and stuff. But, I don't think I live like a crazy life. And again, I'm not like, $100 million guy or anything like that. But, yeah, my day-to-day life didn't really change. I guess it's just like the basic, stress of life. Then what problems does money not solve? I mean, all the kind of stuff that we talked about, the kind of like introspection, the kind of like, your normal insecurities. And I think there's like a popular quote where it's like, wherever you are, that's where you'll be. So it's like, it doesn't matter if you move out to San Diego and go to the beach, like if like you are your own dark cloud, and like you have your own vices that are essentially following you, and like money will never solve those things. In a similar vein, another like expression I like, maybe it's a Mark Twain quote, and he kind of talks about like traveling around the world and like drinking wine in France, and then going to Italy and Sicily and doing all this stuff, and then it's like the person like looks over and it's like there he is, like following me like he always does, like my shadow, and it's just that like that sense of like loneliness, if that's an issue for you, like that's never gonna go away.
Yeah, I mean, I've read the phrase a lot that money doesn't necessarily turn you into a different person. It just kind of like amplifies what you already are. And I found that for myself, for friends that I've seen who've had a big come up, they don't necessarily change. They just become like extreme versions of what they are, and it amplifies the good and the bad.
Wait, I'm curious about you because you're Mr. Quanti Boy, and I know you've thought about retirement a lot.
Yeah.
I know you have a number down to like one decimal place
Yes.
at least. Yeah. I know you've got all your cash flows projected. I know you've got like all your passive income. It's just all on there. And then you've got the whole thing planned out and all the vacations you can take a year and have like your first class seats. Like I know you've got it all.
Wow, alpha here.
No. Like this is very Nick. He's thought about everything. Like do you think you're going to get to a point like where you just like don't work, or do you already know that that's like an illusion, or
No,
like what is your
it's an illusion.
like what is your end equilibrium state,
So-
like as you see it?
I think most people think of a number, right? A number in the bank account, but I don't actually think about that. I think about like a passive income number, mostly through real estate. That's what I care about the most. Like the big number doesn't really tell me much, but like if you tell me, hey, this is how much you have coming in, whether you work or not, that tells me more about like how much freedom I have in my lifestyle. But for as much as I like analyze it and it's in numbers, like you said, and it's like, well, like this is how much money you have, and if you converted your ETH to real estate, this is how much passive income it would, turn into. For as much as I have that, there's another tab in that sheet that like makes me reestablish the gratitude and the freedom that I already have. And I think you need to balance that. And the money goal is important to have. I think it's important to have something to strive for that pulls you forward, but it should be giving you the freedom even more than you already have. It should give, all the blessings in your life even more, as if you already have some of those things.
You're like a pretty well off person. Like what do you think? Like what is like on your horizon for like more freedoms? Really,
I don't know.
For
like,
you,
I truly like in my office, everyone I work with, like I enjoy personally, and I find that a blessing. We're not in a state where like we have to hire someone who's really good at the job, but an asshole at the same time.
you got a good life.
Yeah, and I don't know how much it would change. I would like it at some point where I could like disappear for 4 weeks from the business and be like, okay, like it'll be fine, or it'll break in some places, and I'll just come back and we'll patch it up and it'll be all good.
Yeah. You want a little bit of time?
That makes me think. That's a good question. Do you ever feel, and maybe I don't know if you're allowed to answer this, like somewhat trapped by the business? That was one of the things that scared me with my business, is I was like, dude, like how do I unwind this thing? Especially like I'm managing like my family and friends' money. Like it's not like a job where it's like, oh, I have golden handcuffs and I can quit and then you find a new job. I was like, dude, like I'm managing like all these fucking, loans and shit, and like people have serious money with me. I was like, how the fuck do I ever close this thing down?
Yeah, and I used to think about it in terms of the business. I was like, well, I got to make sure this works. So we employ people. It has to work. Like we need to work for ourselves. But my therapist is like, it's not the business that's locking you down. You have this like quadrant, and you really like this quadrant that is important and urgent. And like, if you don't have anything important and urgent to work on, you seek it.
Yeah.
And I was like, hey, I made some good money from this business, and I started 2 more. And then she was like, oh my God, like this is like almost like she had seen the case like 100 times before. And she was like, this is what traps you. It's not this business or that business or this project that you like. It's this framework where you are addicted to either being needed, on important tasks or like urgent tasks. And I don't really necessarily have a plan on like how to back out of that. I just acknowledge that it exists, and at some point it'll resolve itself. Yeah, so and hopefully it'll resolve itself.
So what does your like week 1 look like?
I don't know if it looks too much different, but
than what, your current week? Or
I mean, I like building things. Don't you like building things?
So you're under no illusion that like, oh, I made all this money, I'm just going to stop.
No, I don't think
so you think you keep going forever, but like what is your goal? You just downgrade the amount of time you work?
Yeah,
like,
maybe.
What is your like equilibrium state?
An 8-hour day, it's like, I don't know, like it's like a 3 or 4 hour day, or I don't know, and then like an optional month off whenever I feel like it, that the business will just kind of continue and everyone will be good. But I don't know if like not building things is an option, and maybe
No, I agree.
I'm lost.
You would
and
go
like,
nuts for sure.
Maybe I'm just missing the point of things, and I just haven't been exposed to a version of life that's like, no, like you can actually do just this other things where, and maybe it happens when I have kids and the whole thing switches, and I'm like, no, like forget the business. I just want to like be at home. I want to take my kids to school. I want to be there to pick them up. I want to, spend as much time with them as possible. So I don't know if that'll be the thing to change it, but as of right now, it doesn't look drastically different.
Okay.
Do some mushrooms. That'll get the juices flowing.
All right. You had a lot of leisure for a while. How many years of leisure?
Let's see. So I sold in like June of 2021, and wait, no, does that make sense? Oh my God, are we in 2024?
Yeah, man.
Yeah.
We're in the time warp era.
Welcome to the future,
Holy
bro.
shit. Well, I think it feels flawed because I was still like a kind of like advisor and like quasi employed with them for like 9 months after I sold. But yeah, so maybe like somewhere between 2 to 3 years, depending on how you count it.
Did it wear off, the leisure?
Well, yeah, I think I mentioned you guys. I like as of this week, I took a new job.
Optionally.
Optionally. One of the companies that I seed invested into is one of these companies that's building these kind of like, you know, Bitcoin ZK roll-ups. And, you know, the CEO was kind of like calling me up, just giving me an investor update. And he's like, well, you know, like, what are you doing? And I was like, well, I'm just like playing pickleball, you know?
Doom scrolling Twitter.
Yeah, exactly.
As one does.
And like in a very like polite way, he was basically like, dude, like get off your ass and like come help us like do something amazing. And you know, we kind of negotiated, like found a little kind of common ground, found like, you know, is there an actual role that I can kind of contribute in, and kind of carved out like a necessary role where I said, hey, look, you know, I don't necessarily need this, but you know, like this could be something amazing, and like I need to make sure that I can go play pickleball, you know, at 9 a.m. if I want. Like I literally told him this.
God, I can imagine as an employer side negotiating with you, and I'd be just like, fuck this, dude. Like the guy wants to play pickleball in the middle of the week. Like we don't need.
Well, I mean, I was just very transparent with him because like, especially like running a business, like it's so much more about the kind of like meritocracy. And it's like, look, like here's kind of the market rate. Like here's essentially what I want, you know, here's how involved I want to be. And either I'm performing or I'm not. And if I'm not, then, you know, we cut ties, you guys lost some money, but like, you know, there's no like equity vest damage to you guys. Cause like, you know, the cliff won't hit for 12 months. Like
Yeah.
it's all good, you know?
So do you feel excited about it?
I feel stoked on it, but it's
right.
still too early to tell. Like I'm still don't like, you know, it's like I'm kind of doing some work, but I kind of have to. It's such just like an early stage company, and there's a lot of work to do.
Wait, so I just thought this is a non sequitur from your thing. Sorry, but I thought of something you said.
Mm-hmm.
You were like, "I'll work like 4 hours." That everybody says, like, "Yeah, I'll work 4 hours a day." Is this like the Mexican fisherman parable, where we're just like should we just skip to everybody working 4 hours a day? Like, would the whole world just be fine if everybody just worked 4 hours, and then that was it? Like,
Yeah, man.
everybody's cool, everybody's chill.
If I could work 4 hours and the company made like 85% of the profits it makes, that would be like amazing.
But what if
trade-off.
everybody else was also working 4 hours?
Well,
Like, there was
computers
just like
are-
a
the AI is doing all the
whole
work.
GDP would cut by 50%? And
Yeah, I got that, of course. But like, dude, but like, do we really need all? Do we need all the GDP?
I know Europeans are kind of.
I don't know. Is Bernie onto something? You scoff, but like
MMTers have
everybody is like, I'll just work 4 hours a week. What if everybody just works 4 hours a week and then nobody's thinking about retirement anymore because everybody's like, yeah, I'm just chill. I'm like, whatever. I'm doing something for 4 hours.
I have
game theory
actually,
doesn't
4
play
hours
out,
a day.
sir.
Yeah.
I
No?
have actually thought about that. Like, you know, if we do get into this kind of AI revolution and productivity goes like, you know, exponential, and it's just like, holy shit, like there will be a world where, you know, humans like they're not needed anymore for their kind of like for their manpower or for like, you know, their ability to actually produce something. And like really the kind of like the currency and the value in human society will be more like creative endeavors. And so like I have thought about that stuff. It's like I need to kind of find, you know, passions beyond like building something, because like there will be a future where like I will not need to build anything.
Right.
And I think like if this kind of AI revolution takes off, you know, I think it'll just bring humans to kind of like their true role. Like I always think that like humans are not, you know, thinking machines that can feel. Like we are feeling machines that just coincidentally happen to be able to think. And we've used that ability to think to kind of create these kind of like you know, all this productivity and this progress in the world. But at our core, like we are not thinking rational human beings. Like, you know, that's like sales 101, right? It's like everybody is in it for the kind of like the emotion and the feel and all of that. And like even just, you know, laws of attraction, like all of this stuff, human psychology is bound by emotions. And when we're no longer needed to kind of produce, we will go back to those things. And so I went from kind of whatever it was, like a right side brain of the person, to now I'm like, I want to be this left side of the brain. Like, you know, maybe go out and do music or, you know, art or some sort of like, you know, passion project.
Yeah. I mean, like I have the art studio across the hall from here, and you know, that could be an outlet. But I think the thing that you mentioned, I have this graphic of like A, before making a lot of money, B, make a lot of money, C, do whatever you would do after money. Can you just go instead of going A to B to C, can you just go from A to C? And is that realistic? And I think it's a good question to like re-ask yourself, because like, could I shortcut to what I want without having to achieve or make this trade-off of like hitting X number and trading off years of life in order to hit whatever that would be. And it's a tough place to reach for yourself on what that may be.
I just feel like it keeps coming back to the freaking work week, honestly. And like I'm like thinking about this, and everybody, like, when everybody talks about what they want to do, like ultimately if you pin them down, they just want like more time to do like other things. They don't want to not work at all. Sometimes they want their work to be better, yeah, but like often they just want more time and more freedom. And even if they don't think they want that, like they want to stop, they turn into David and they come back and take another job. Like it's like a tale as old as time at this point, right? But it almost feels like the entire 40-hour work week as we have it is like, it's not something that's calibrated to productivity. It's like calibrated to like maximum human pain tolerance, right? Because if you think about like the 1930s or 40s, right? Like if people went to an office in 1940, like what the fuck were they doing?
They weren't in an office. They were in like
we're in 1950, 1960. Like there's no computer. Like people weren't productive. Like we're productive today, right? So productivity skyrockets, and what happens? Like people are working more. We're not working less. We're not like, okay, we have enough productivity, let's cut the work hours down. Like we just squeeze people more because it's just squeezing people to their pain point. Like it's not productivity optimized. So this idea that in the future, like we're gonna have like these AI robots and we'll just think things and they'll do things, then we'll have a 10-hour work week because the bots will do. No, we'll just have like a 40-hour work week where we're like 8 times more productive because we have like an army of like robot assistants with AI, but we're everybody's still getting squeezed, right?
12% annual returns in the S&P 500 for the rest of my life. So like, you know.
So we just have to hedge this by buying the NASDAQ and we'll be fine, I guess. Thank you, Nick.
Yeah.
We're over 2 hours in. You wanna put a bow on it?
Yeah, I don't know, David. Do you have any like calls to action for anyone? You know, when you went on the Bankless podcast, I asked you, so like, what company are you shilling or what project? You're like, nothing.
Shill us something, Daddy.
I'm just interested. But if you don't have that, do you have like a call to action or something that's worth investigating? Because we do have a very curious audience. They're not beholden to any one thought. They like to be poked with new ideas and pulled in different directions. So do you have something for them that you would do?
That's good. Shill an idea.
Yeah. Probably nothing that this audience is going to like. I mean, just because I'm going to say that the token to buy is Bitcoin. You know, I think that there will be opportunities to invest as a byproduct of all this stuff that we said, whether you want to go that kind of miner route or you want to go like ordinals and inscriptions, or like you want to invest in these layer 2s. But what I worry about with shilling something is that there's going to be so many teams that latch onto this narrative and they're like, we're building a Bitcoin layer 2, you know, here's our token. And I will say that there is a vast majority of these projects that are being built that, in my opinion, are not kind of legit. So just, you know, be careful out there. The teams that I know of that are like very legit don't have plans to issue a token, at least anywhere in the near future. So take that for whatever signal you want.
Interesting. Any life takeaways that are life questions that we should ask? Mainly for myself, because Steven is questioning me, and now I'm questioning if my spreadsheet is right, or if it's asking the right questions.
Your spreadsheet needs some updating, bro.
Yeah, but I mean, you got good questions that we should continue to ask ourselves. You know, a lot of these guys are, you know, trying to reach some kind of financial independence. Is there maybe a better question we should be asking ourselves?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if I have, you know, any sort of good questions. I just, you know, maybe life advice, like you got to go out and be a doer. You got to go out and, you know, take risks. You can't sit around and kind of like, you know, ruminate. Like there's only so many times you can kind of think on something. And so don't be afraid to take the risk. And I'm not saying going on, don't be afraid to take the risk on fucking shitcoin XYZ, but just in life in general, you know, it's like you only have so much time on this earth. And I think as you do get older, I think all of us are still like, you know, like quite young, but like, you know, some of those things you kind of contemplate, you're like, wow, like, you know, maybe like the clock is running.
Right.
Yeah.
Well,
do things.
Yeah.
Do things, fam.
I'm really glad that you were here. I'm also sad that Armand and Eric weren't here because like they would have had some really good questions and takes alongside yours. You definitely fit.
Sure, Armand was screaming at the TV screen the whole time.
Yeah, well, he should have donated to put some comments on the screen.
He should have.
I saw him in the chat.
I saw him in the chat too. I didn't see any donations roll through.
Well, thank you all in the chat for sticking with us through the episode. We love you for joining us. Again, Wednesdays, 5 p.m. PST. All the links are at alfalfapod.com. check out David Seroy on Twitter. The link will be in the show notes as well to his Twitter. And yeah, like the video if you haven't already. And otherwise, check out Irresponsibly Long tomorrow, Thursday, 5 p.m. ST.
Might have to kick around some of these ideas a little bit more,
I think
actually.
so.
Yeah.
I think so.
I'm going to go home and sleep on it.
And otherwise, we'll see you next week.
Thanks,
you guys.
everybody.
Bye-bye.